Chapter 675. Wearing a bamboo hat. Li came out of the pharmacy with a lot of things in his hands. The fat man didn't lie to him last night. When he handed over the money to buy these herbs, the shop assistant accepted it without hesitation. Along the way, he saw two banks on the street. The name of the bank was Bank. It seemed simple and crude, but it had a profound meaning. It was because it was opened by a big family surnamed Chien. When people talked about it, they would feel that all the banks in the world were their own homes. The Chien family was very famous in Fengzhou City because of their wealth. Fengzhou City was prosperous, and there were many rich families. Some of them were new families, and some were well-known families with deep heritage. The Chien family belonged to the former, and it couldn't be more new. It was said that the master of the Chien family was originally a destitute laborer. However, he had unexpectedly made a fortune more than 10 years ago. He had started by unloading goods from ships. Then, he had slowly started a small business. Step by step, he had expanded his business. After 10 years, the wealth accumulated by the Chien family had surpassed most of the so-called rich and powerful families in Fengzhou City. Including those well-known families with decades of heritage, the wealth of the Chien family could be ranked in the top 5 in the entire Fengzhou City. In other words, the number of families in the entire Fengzhou City that were richer than the Chien family could be counted on one hand. Although power and money couldn't be separated since ancient times, the reality was that those with power had money, and those with money didn't necessarily have power. Especially in today's era, businessmen were lowly. The richer they were, the more they had to accept the ridicule and indifference of others. The Chien family was such an existence. They were different from those families that had accumulated wealth and reputation for hundreds of years. In the eyes of most people, they were villains, landlords, and nouveau riche. They weren't recognized by the upper class. Unlike the later generations, this kind of people were successful entrepreneurs, leading the trend of success studies and idols in the hearts of countless confused youths. They could write books such as Qiannaiji Success Studies, The Law of Success, Chicken Soup for Success, and so on. They could be sold out. This information was obtained by Li from an insider. At that time, the insider was blocked by him in the corner. He shouted, "Hero, please spare my life," and told him the story of the Chien family's prosperity. He even told him that the head of the Chien family kept a concubine in a small building, and that young Master Chien and a scholar were suspected to have a homosexual fetish. Before leaving, the insider sincerely suggested that if he wanted to rob the money, he should go straight along this road and then turn left. The biggest and most luxurious mansion with a silver lion at the door should be the one. This was the information he politely inquired. As for yesterday's young Master Chien's wish, he didn't know yet. He didn't have many poems, but all of them were fine works. Yan Jidao's style of poetry was deep and profound, and he was good at expressing emotions. His achievements in literature were even higher than his father, Yan Shu's, in both the current and future generations. Yan Jidao was someone who didn't even take Sushir seriously. He didn't have many poems, but all of them were excellent. Due to the problems in his life, there were many poems in his poems that sympathized with the fate of prostitutes and dancers and praised their beautiful souls. His style was sad and touching. Which young girl doesn't yearn for love? Which young woman doesn't? Even prostitutes and dancers must have a lover in their hearts that they are looking forward to meeting. Because of their status, they yearn for beautiful things and feelings. Unfortunately, due to their status and age, most women can't obtain the happiness they hope for. If this emotional partridge sky were to be circulated, who knows how many women's hearts would be pierced. He didn't know if those women's hearts were pierced, but his own heart was pierced. With the help of medicinal materials, Mississippi Lou's body recovered quickly. This time, he gritted his teeth and spent 500 taels of silver to buy medicinal materials of higher quality and older. If he could sell a few more poems, he and Mississippi Lou would soon be able to return home. Half of the 10 banknotes were gone in a short time. Rich people could only be found by chance. He was a little regretful. He should have left his contact information yesterday. Although he knew where the Chien family was, He couldn't go to them with a mask like this, wearing a bamboo hat and walking on the street. Many people turned their heads. If it weren't for the fact that some people in Jianghu often dress like this, people wouldn't be too surprised. Perhaps they would be invited to tea by the patrolling soldiers after a while. At a certain moment, a man wearing a bamboo hat walked into a deep alley. Not long after, a young man came out from the other side of the alley. Li Yi looked at the sky. He had been delayed on the road today. He had to hurry back to cook for Mississippi Lu. Fonglin Garden was just ahead. When Li Yi walked over, he greeted Lin Yong, who was leaning against the door. He walked to a small courtyard and gently knocked on the door. Today, Mississippi Lu took a long time to open the door. Li Yi looked at her suspiciously. He pointed at her face and asked, "What's wrong with you? Didn't you wash your face when you woke up this morning?" Mississippi Lu's expression was a little unnatural. She wiped her face with her sleeves and said, "Go wash your hands. It's time to eat. You went out to buy food?" Li Yi walked into the house and said, "Didn't I say to wait for me to come back? Your body hasn't recovered yet. It's dangerous outside." He looked at the unknown object on the table and looked up at Mississippi Lu. He asked this, "Where did you buy this food from? Eat it if you want." Mississippi Lu glanced at him and turned around to walk back to her room. Li Yi reached out his chopsticks and picked up the paste in front of him. He vaguely recognized that this should be green vegetables. As for the other plate, he could only say that he was not knowledgeable enough. He looked at the rice again. Forget it. He could not bear to look anymore. This was obviously the work of Mississippi Lu. No wonder her face was black and white just now. She was also wearing an apron around her waist. Other people were men who work hard to earn money to support their families. When they returned home, the women had already prepared a table full of delicious food for them. Mississippi Lu was also waiting for him, waiting to poison him to death. Just as Li Yi was facing the unknown object on the table and was at a loss of what to do, Lin Yong walked in from the door with a smile and said, "Li Brothers eating, Brother Lin, you haven't eaten yet, right?" Li looked up at him and was stunned for a moment. He immediately said, "Sit down and eat with us. This is so embarrassing." Lin Yong rubbed his hands and sat opposite Li Yi in embarrassment. He looked at Li Yi in surprise. He felt that the Li brothers seemed to be very friendly to him today. Li Yi handed him the chopsticks and said with a smile, "Don't stand on ceremony. I made a lot of food today. Brother Lin, you can eat as much as you want." "Haha, then I won't stand on ceremony." Lin Yong took the chopsticks and laughed. He asked, "Where's the food? Is it not here yet?" "Li Brothers, you sit down. I'll go get it." His eyes inadvertently swept across the table and asked in confusion, "What is this?" "This is it." Li looked at him and said sincerely, "What is it?" Lin Yong looked confused. Li Yi pushed the two dishes over and said, "I've already eaten outside. Brother Lin, don't stand on ceremony. Do you want me to help you get 2 more bowls of rice?" Lin Yong lowered his head to take a look and finally realized something. His expression changed. "Haha, I'm so embarrassed to eat here every day, Li Brothers." Lin Yong put down the chopsticks and strode outside. He said apologetically, "I suddenly remembered that Miss was looking for me. I'll go and ask her first. It's okay." Lin Wanru came in from outside. She looked at him and said, "The shop is not too busy now. You eat your food. I have something to ask Li." She turned to look at Li Yi and said, "I wonder if it's convenient for Li to come over now." Li Yi stood up and patted Lin Yong's shoulder. He said, "Brother Lin, food is precious. Don't waste it." Lin Yong stood up and looked down at the table. His face instantly turned pale. Chapter 676. In the courtyard, Lin Yong picked up his chopsticks, carefully picked up a piece of vegetable, and put it into his mouth. He chewed twice, making crunching sounds. In the next moment, his expression changed drastically. He put down his chopsticks and rushed out of the door. On the other side, Li Yi followed Lin Wanru through Fonglin Park and came to a room behind a shop. Lin Wanru poured him a cup of tea and said, "Take a seat first. I'll go get the account book. There are a few places that I don't quite understand. The way you keep accounts is very special." Li Yi nodded and sat down at the table in the room.
The layout of Fonglin Park was similar to that of Rui Square. At the front was a shop, and at the back was a place for people to rest. There were not many furnishings in this room. There were tables, chairs, beds, and cabinets. Everywhere was simple. The most eye-catching thing was the many calligraphy paintings hanging on the walls. Although they were called calligraphy paintings, they were actually just words. Lee knew that this Miss Lin was a person who loved calligraphy. The works hanging in her room were not the best, but they were of a certain standard. There were books on the table, as well as some neatly stacked manuscripts. When Lee skimmed to the top page, he was slightly stunned. The reason why he was stunned was not only because this was the poem Partridge Sky that he had sold to the fat man yesterday, but also because this handwriting was Wang Shiji's semi-cursive script. The ink on the paper was still wet, and it was clearly written not long ago. Women in this world, as long as they studied in primary school, would all use the hairpin-style, small regular script. It was rare to see a semi-cursive script. He picked up the paper and looked at it doubtfully. It's not a good imitation. Please excuse me. Lin Wanru's voice came from the side. She said, "In the Jing Kingdom, you should often see the handwriting of that #1 scholar. Otherwise, you can't imitate it so well. Ever since Zhao Xiaowen spread this handwriting, many people in the Qi Kingdom have begun to imitate it. I have to say, among these people, you are the best at imitating." Li Yi was stunned for a moment. He nodded and said, "I see it quite often." Just a moment ago, she was still puzzled. When he copied the poem yesterday, he had used a different style of writing. After knowing her for so long, she did not expect that this Miss Lin was also his fan. Life was really full of surprises. Li Yi pointed at the paper and asked, "This poem, they said it came from Qingshui River last night. Zhao Xiaowen hasn't had any poems recently. It's been a long time since I've seen such a good poem." Li Yi nodded and didn't ask any more questions. It seemed that the man wouldn't think that his money was wasted. As if she had thought of something, Lin Wanru asked again, "The poems composed by that #1 scholar of yours have long spread throughout the Qi Kingdom. Did he compose any new poems after that?" "I don't know much about poetry, and I've never paid attention to it." Li Yi shook his head and said, "You just said that you have questions for me." Lin Wanru also didn't continue this topic. She flipped open the account book and pointed at a certain part of it. She said, "I'm still not clear about these accounts. Can you explain them to me?" "Of course." Li Yi nodded and shifted his gaze over. After about a quarter of an hour, Lin Wanru held a piece of paper in her hands that she had just calculated. After looking at it carefully for a few times, she carefully put it away. At the same time, in the small courtyard that was separated by a wall, Li put on his apron and glanced at Mississippi Lu. He said, "There's no time to cook. There's still some white rice left from yesterday. Let's make do with egg fried rice for breakfast." The heavens had given her the face of an angel. With the strength of a devil, she had to collect some commission somewhere else. In this life, he didn't expect Mississippi Lu to cook. Li was already very pleased that she had the intention to do so. In the afternoon, the man named Lin Yong didn't come over for a free meal. He only went out for a stroll like he did yesterday. After eating, he would exercise a little and sleep with Mississippi Lu after the sun set. They slept separately. He didn't know if practicing the tortoise breathing technique had any healing effects. However, at least he could fall asleep immediately when he was bored. From then on, he wouldn't have to suffer from insomnia anymore. Li Yi turned off the light and looked at the other side of the room that was separated by a piece of cloth. He slowly closed his eyes when he heard the sound of even breathing coming from the other side. The small courtyard quickly fell into silence. Outside the courtyard, the place a few streets away gradually became noisy. No matter which city it was, the most prosperous and noisy place would always be the red light district. The Qingshui River passed through Feng State City. There were many lofts on both sides of the river. Although it was also a place of pleasure, it was slightly more classy. Most of them didn't engage in the naked business of sex. Instead, they were scholars, singers, dancers, lovers, and happy things. Although Feng State City was remote, it was far away from the war. The people lived in peace. Both sides of the Qingshui River were naturally jubilant tonight. In a small building somewhere,
the famous prostitute of Feng State, Hu Yingying, was performing on stage. She was performing her famous skill, the rebound pipa. In the entire Feng State, she was the only one who could perform this kind of dance to the extreme. Hu Yingying also relied on this unique skill to look down on all the other beauties and become the star of this small building. In the past, every time she performed a rebound pipa, there would be no empty seats. However, today, although there were many people below the stage, it was far less than in the past. Among the whispers of the people below, the words "Young Master Qian" would occasionally appear. Everyone here knew that young Master Qian was interested in Hu Yingying. However, Miss Hu Yingying, who was famous in Feng State, naturally looked down on that fat guy who reeked of money. Even though he had spent a lot of money several times, she still accepted the money and never asked to meet him alone. This kind of thing was very normal. However, yesterday, the ignorant and incompetent young Master Qian actually got a good poem from somewhere and gave it to another lady in the building. Not only that, but he also took back the 1,000 taels of silver that he gave to Hu Yingying. If it was in the past, this kind of behavior would naturally attract ridicule from the crowd. However, yesterday, they couldn't laugh at all. That was because the poem was really beyond their expectations. The whole poem was only about 50 words, but it vividly expressed the first alliance, separation, and reunion between a man and a woman. Writing about sorrow, writing about joy, they were all so sincere and deep that they could shake one's heart. His words were the voice of one's heart. Only a person with true feelings could write such poems. To be able to write such poems, one must also be a person with true feelings. Of course, no one believed that the person who was deeply in love was richy young Master Qian Duo. He was probably annoyed by Hu Yingying and bought poems to give to others. Then he asked for the money back in order to humiliate her. He had to admit that he had achieved his goal. That sincere poem really touched many people, especially evoking some emotions in the hearts of many singers and dancers. Overnight, it spread across both sides of Qingshui River. The most discussed topic was the poem written by young Master Qian. Where did he buy it from? Hu Yingying lost face, and her popularity plummeted. On the other hand, the girl named Shi's popularity rose by a large margin. In a single night, she replaced Hu Yingying and became the most popular girl here. Even if Hu Yingying used her famous skills tonight, she still couldn't turn the tide. The phrase, "I'm afraid that we'll meet again in a dream," made many girls cry. Although they despised young Master Qian Duo's behavior of buying the poem, they couldn't blame him for seeing such an excellent piece of work. Instead, there were people who tried to find out who wrote the poem. However, young Master Qian Duo insisted that he was the one who wrote the poem and refused to budge. Many people had no choice but to leave. I should have bought 100 taels of silver. That night, on the street beside the river, a slightly plump young man stood at the entrance of an alley. He paced anxiously as he muttered to himself. Initially, he thought that by throwing the poem out, he would be able to shock everyone and let Hu Yingying see that he was a real talent. Then he would turn around and leave, regaining all the dignity that he had lost in the past. However, who would have thought that he would achieve his goal? Early this morning, the Qian family's doorstep was almost trampled through. In the end, he couldn't take it anymore and ran out from the back door. Only then did he barely escape the calamity. At this moment, he finally knew that after telling the first lie, he would have to use countless lies to cover it up. The brother in the dark indeed didn't lie to him. A poem worth 1,000 taels of silver was indeed worth 1,000 taels of silver. He decided to buy one worth 10,000 taels of silver first. In the future, if he saw any lousy scholar that he didn't like, he would use the poem to smash them to death. A figure walked out of the alley. Qian Duo immediately went up and asked anxiously, "Brother, is that you?" The man who walked out of the alley was stunned for a moment. Then, he said angrily, "How dare you scold my mother?" While Qian Duo was stunned, a fist swung over from the front. Note, in ancient Chinese, there are also terms for father and mother. These two terms have existed since ancient times and are not foreign words. In ancient times, mother did not necessarily refer to a brothel keeper.
I suddenly remembered that I wrote an empty poem. What's the point of explaining this? To make up the number of words? Chapter 677. Asterisk bang. Asterisk Chien duo kicked the man into the alley. He curled his lips and said, "Do you really think that the 2 kilograms of meat on my body are just for show? If you want to fight with me, go back and eat for a few more years." He clapped his hands and turned around to look at the bustling street. A vexed expression appeared on his face as he murmured, "Brother, where the hell are you?" Asterisk bang. Asterisk in a certain room in the attic. A woman named Hu Ying fiercely threw her pipa to the ground. Her face was filled with anger as she coldly said, "Surname Chien, you've gone too far." Okay, you still have the face to talk about others?" The madam stood behind her and glanced at her. She said, "How many times do I have to tell you not to be too unsightly when you eat? You don't even try to win over your sugar daddy. Instead, you flirt with those poor scholars all day. How do you think you so-called famous courtesans came to be? It's all because of money. This time, I'll teach you a lesson. All of you be more careful." Hu Ying said with a straight face, "But no buts." The madam waved her hand and said, "Find time to properly apologize to young Master Chien. Let me tell you, if you have the surname Chien in the future, you'll enjoy endless glory and wealth. The money that old Master Chien spills out from between his fingers is enough to buy this entire building. I might even have to listen to your face. Tell me, what's so good about those poor scholars? If you follow them, you deserve to suffer for the rest of your life." Hu Ying gritted her teeth and didn't say anything else. The madam glanced at her and walked out of the room. When she reached the door, she turned around and said, "Don't tell me that you're still thinking about that person. Let me give you a piece of advice. Give up. You're just a prostitute. You can't reach his level." Hu Ying raised her head and gritted her teeth. She said, "Ying understands, afraid that we'll meet again in a dream. Xiuwen, do you think this poem was really written by that young Master Chien?" In a luxurious mansion in Feng State City, a white-clothed youth recited a few lines and raised his head to look at the young man in front of him. "Regardless of whether he is or not, I have to meet this young Master Chien." Zhao Xiuwen, who had been writing, put down his brush and looked at the partridge sky that he had recopied onto the paper. He said, "It's not important whether he bought this poem or not. What's important is where he bought it from. I'm more interested in someone who can write such a poem. Don't you find it strange, Yinzhou? Becoming famous overnight is a little strange." Yang Yinzhou nodded and said, "The style of the poem is unique. It's unlike anyone I know. Although the theme is nothing more than sadness and resentment, feelings and nostalgia, it's tactful and delicate. It's also romantic and charming. It's fresh and handsome. I really can't think of anyone else in Feng Province or even the Qi Kingdom who has such a standard." He looked at Zhao Xiuwen and said, "If you didn't deny it just now, I really would have thought that this was one of your hobbies. I don't have the leisure to do that." Zhao Xiuwen said with a smile, "However, that young Master Chien is the son of the god of wealth. It doesn't seem to be easy. The god of wealth will probably give you face." Yang Yinzhou shook his head and then looked at him again. He said, "I heard from the third prince that that person seems to have come to the Qi Kingdom. Do you know?" "Who?" Zhao Xiuwen raised his head and asked in confusion. "Li Yi," Yang Yinzhou said, looking at him. Zhao Xiuwen was stunned and slowly stood up from the chair. "Are you sure you found out everything?" On a street somewhere in Feng Province, the young man stopped and looked at a shop in front of him and asked again. The servant behind him immediately replied, "Young master, I found out everything." The scholar came back from the Jing Kingdom with Miss Lin. It seems that they were in trouble. They have an injured wife with them. They live in the courtyard next to Fenglin Garden. The young man nodded and said, "Let's go." Li Yi walked out of the courtyard and saw Lin Yong at the gate of Fenglin Garden. He said casually, "Brother Lin, have you eaten? Do you want to come in and eat?" Growl. Hearing the word eat, Lin Yong's stomach growled. He looked up at Li Yi and shook his head. He said righteously, "No need, no need. I've eaten outside just now. Thank you for your kindness, Li brothers." Mississippi, Lu suffered another blow.
she probably wouldn't cook for a while. However, it seemed that she had left a big shadow in Lin Yang's heart. He had obviously only tasted one bite yesterday and regarded that courtyard as a dragon's pool and a tiger's den. Back then, he had eaten all the food she made. In the end, he still went back and brought Lin Yong a serving of rice. After tasting it, the mountain-like man was moved to tears. Just as Li Yi was about to go back, he heard noises coming from the shop. Inside Fong Lin Garden, the man surnamed by looked at Lin Wanru and said with a bitter smile, "Wanru, think about it again. 10,000 taels of silver is not a low price. My father likes Liuli the most. I really can't think of a good gift to give him for his birthday." Lin Wanru shook her head and said, "I'm sorry. The flying swallow horse is the treasure of Fonglin Garden. It's not for sale. I know it's a bit difficult." The man surnamed by looked troubled and said, "But I also want my father to be happy. Otherwise, I definitely wouldn't ask. I'm really sorry. I can't make the decision alone." Lin Wanru still shook her head. Not long after, the man surnamed by walked out of the shop. After glancing at Li Yi, he shook his head and turned to leave. Li Yi thought about it and walked into the shop. He saw Lin Wanru standing in front of the Liuli ware. He walked over and looked at her. After hesitating for a moment, he said, "Miss Lin, if you can sell this Liuli ware, it's better to sell it as soon as possible." "Why?" Lin Wanru looked at him and asked with a frown. Li Yi pointed at the Liuli ware and said, "There are some foreign merchants who claim to be from Great Britain. They traveled over land and water to bring a large amount of Liuli ware here. This thing will soon be worthless. So, it's better to sell it as soon as possible." "How do you know?" Lin Wanru looked at him and asked. "It's a coincidence. I saw them in the Jing Kingdom before. It won't be long before they reach the Qi Kingdom." Li could only say so much. Any more would involve business secrets. It was not easy for the British merchants. They traveled thousands of miles, traveled over land and water, and lost a lot of people. It was not easy for them to come here. He had to give them a way out. Watching him leave, Lin Wanru's face showed a thoughtful expression. When she looked at the flying swallow again, her eyes changed a little. "Great Britain? A foreign merchant?" Lin Wanru's face showed a thoughtful expression. "I've never heard of this foreign country. Is it rich in Liuli ware?" Chongzhou and Fengzhou were neighbors. If one rode a fast horse, it would take a day's journey from Fengzhou to the border of the Qi Kingdom. After crossing the river from Chongzhou, one would reach the territory of the Jing Kingdom. In a shop in Fengzhou City, the shop assistant scratched his head in confusion and asked, "Where did you say you came from? I didn't hear you clearly. Say it again." At this time, there were a few men in ragged clothes with unkempt hair and dirty faces. The man in the front looked at him and said arrogantly, "Listen carefully. We come from the great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. We have a big business with you. Hurry up and ask your shopkeeper to come out." "What are you doing?" The shop assistant looked at them with disdain. He waved his hand and said impatiently, "A bunch of stinky beggars. You want to ask our shopkeeper to come out? Hurry up and get lost. If you don't, I'll let the dogs bite you." The man in the front turned around and gave another man a look. The man immediately opened a big box on the ground. In an instant, the whole shop was lit up. The shop assistant looked at the box with his mouth wide open. He was stunned. After a while, he shouted and ran to the back. "Shopkeeper, come out quickly." Chapter 678. Qin Duo had been distressed for the past 2 days. The poem Partridge in the Sky and the phrase, "I'm afraid we'll meet in a dream," had spread his name throughout the entire Feng State City. Although his name was well known in Feng State City before this, the meaning was very different. Foppish, idiot, prodigal. This was what people thought of him before. Foppish, idiot, prodigal, poem seller. This was what people thought of him now. He needed to prove himself and prove that he didn't buy the poem. He wasn't an idiot. He just didn't want others to know about it. However, the brother who sold him the poem had disappeared. The other party appeared mysteriously and disappeared mysteriously. He hadn't appeared since that night. It was as if the other party had appeared to save him that day. He didn't know the brother's name or appearance. The only clue he had was that alley. Therefore, he asked his father to buy the restaurant across the alley the next day. At this time, he was sitting in the restaurant's lobby. From time to time, he would look outside. If he saw someone stopping at the alley, he would go out and ask them. However, it had been 2 days, and he still hadn't seen the person he was looking for. He sighed as he walked out of the alley again and returned to the restaurant. Lee leaned against the wall outside his shop. Occasionally, he would look inside and be cut by the gazes of the 2 women at the door. He looked up and saw that the sign of Rui Workshop was very eye-catching. He couldn't help but feel a bit depressed. He didn't know which bastard had copied the style of his own underwear, but he had even copied the name of the shop. Not only did he plagiarize, but he also didn't want to let him in Mississippi Lou was injured. If something happened to her inside, he wouldn't be able to help her in time. He had brought Mississippi Lou out to shop during the day to buy some clothes and daily necessities. She had been in the underwear shop for a quarter of an hour. It seemed like she wouldn't be able to come out anytime soon. He leaned against the wall in boredom. He looked at the people coming and going on the street. When his eyes swept across a certain alley, he was slightly stunned. Did she leave Foam State? Chien Duo walked out of the alley again and sighed. When he was about to enter the restaurant, he suddenly heard a voice coming from the alley behind him. Are you satisfied with the poem? Hearing the familiar voice, Chien Duo stopped in his tracks. He immediately turned around and said, Brother, you're here. The voice just now came from inside the alley. He quickly walked into the alley, and when he was halfway there, the voice sounded again. All right, just stop there. Chien Duo immediately stopped in his tracks and looked at the corner of the alley, where a corner of a shirt could be seen. Are you satisfied with the words? The voice rang out again. Yes, I'm very satisfied. Chien Duo nodded fiercely. He had never bought such a valuable thing in his life. Now that he recalled the expressions of those people that night, he felt so happy that he wanted to shout out loud. As long as you're satisfied, I'm leaving. When the voice rang out again, a copper coin flew out from the corner of the alley. Received a good review, returned 1 coin. Chien Duo caught the copper coin, and after being stunned for a moment, his expression changed. He quickly took a few steps forward and then seemed to remember something. He stopped and anxiously said, Brother, please wait. A moment later, a voice came from the other side. Is there anything else? A smile appeared on Chien Duo's face as he said, I wonder if Brother still has poems for sale? The voice paused and asked, How many songs do you want? 10 songs. Just like before, 10,000 taels of silver. According to your rules, buy 5 and get 1 free, buy 10 and get 3 free. That's a total of 13 songs. Are there any special requirements? Just like the previous song, Love Between a Man and a Woman. Chien Duo nodded vigorously. Yes, that's it. The person on the other side did not speak immediately, as if he was thinking. After a while, the voice sounded again. Pay a deposit of 5,000 taels first, and the item you want will be delivered to you by tonight. Chien Duo took out a stack of banknotes from his pocket. After splitting them in half, he walked to the corner of the room and carefully handed them over. 5,000 taels. Aren't you afraid that I'll run away with the money? He leaned against the wall and asked. I trust you, brother. The voice came from the other side. Besides, it's only 5,000 taels, but 5 days' worth of pocket money. Lee waved his hand and said, Wait at the entrance of the alley before it gets dark. Thank you, brother. Chien Duo beamed with joy and asked again, May I know your name, brother? Then, as if he remembered something, he immediately said, I'm sorry. I broke the rules. Brother, please don't blame me. It's fine. The voice was very straightforward this time. Fine, I won't change my name or my surname. Just call me Lihan. Where did you go? When Lee walked back, Mississippi Lou was standing in front of the underwear store, holding 2 exquisite bags in her hands as she looked at him and asked, Just walking around. Lee took the bags from her hands and said, Let's go and take a look in front. Catch him quickly. As soon as he said that, an anxious voice came from behind. A figure ran past Lee at lightning speed, followed by a middle-aged fat man who was panting heavily. When the fat man ran to Li Yi's side, he finally could not run anymore. With one hand on his waist, he shouted weakly, "Catch the thief! Catch the thief! It's you?" Lee looked at the middle-aged fat man and asked in surprise. The fat man only glanced at him, took a moment to catch his breath, and continued to run forward. Lee shook his head. The jade pendant given to him by the old emperor had only been sold for 1,000 taels of silver to this fatty. To think that this fellow would end up like this. From the looks of it, the thief must have stolen something valuable from him. Let's go. The thief had already disappeared. Lee looked at Mississippi Lou. There was still a ready-made clothing store in front. They would go there for a while before going home to cook. In front, the middle-aged fat man held his waist and said to a constable, the money bag has been stolen. There's also a piece." He paused for a moment. "It's the money bag has been stolen. Chase." The constable looked at the direction he was pointing at, waved his hand, and immediately chased after the thief with the other constables behind him, in a dilapidated alley somewhere. "Haha, today's harvest is not bad." A man waved to the two people beside him as if he was showing off. "There's actually so much silver." After saying that, he spread out his other hand and said, "There's also a piece of broken jade. I don't know how much it's worth. Let's find a place to pawn it tomorrow." Not long after, the few people came out of the alley with satisfaction and bumped into a person who was walking towards them. "Damn, are you blind? It's you again." The man looked at the man who bumped into him and grabbed him by the collar, mocking, "Why didn't you ask me if I've heard of your Patian Empress today?" "Protector, it's him." The man pulled on a man's clothes and said loudly. As soon as he said that, more than 10 figures rushed out from a nearby house. The person in front was a man in blue. At this moment, he was looking at the few people with gloomy eyes. He waved his hand and said, "Arrest them." The yellow-clothed people behind him rushed forward. "Damn, there's actually an accomplice." The man's expression changed, and he kicked away the man who was grabbing his clothes. The two people beside him had already reacted and madly ran forward. "Chase," the man in blue ordered. Everyone immediately responded and chased in the direction that the three people had escaped in. "Damn, I'm dead tired." Not long after, the man and the two people stood on the street, bent over and panting heavily. At this point, those people finally didn't dare to chase them anymore. "Tired? If you're tired, then take a rest." A voice came from behind. The man suddenly turned around and saw that the constable had placed a knife on his neck. Immediately, other constables came over and locked the three people together. "Why don't you come with us?" The leading constable waved his hand, and a few constables carried the three dejected people towards the direction of the yamen. Chapter 679. You can decide what to do with this case. I'm going to sleep for a while. Somewhere in Fengzhou City, the county magistrate yawned and waved his hand to the bailiffs. He then leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He was getting old, and his body couldn't take it anymore. Yesterday, he had fought with his new concubine until dawn, but now he couldn't take it anymore. "Yes, Your Excellency." The bailiff cupped his hands and bowed. "Tell me, how many times have you done this?" He walked down and patted the man's face. The big man sighed and said, "I can't count. You have hands and feet. You could do anything. Why do you have to steal and rob?" The bailiff looked at him and said, "Now that you're out, find some serious work. Don't let me see you in the county jail again." "Alas, life is hard." The big man sighed and said in a melancholy tone, "It's impossible to work. I'm not born for this. If I don't steal and rob, I'll starve to death." The bailiff slapped his head and waved his hand, saying, "Take him away. See if there's anything missing." Another bailiff pulled a bag of money from the big man's body and threw it to the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man opened the bag and looked inside. His face was gloomy. Finally, he gritted his teeth and said, "There's nothing missing." He couldn't tell anyone about the jade pendant that he had planned to trade in the black market. Although it would cost him nearly 10,000 taels of silver, it was a crime that could get him beheaded for hiding an item belonging to the royal family. He couldn't let the government know about it. Fortunately, the big man had already thrown away the jade pendant. Although he was distressed about the money, He didn't feel so bad when he thought that it was from a guy who didn't know how to pawn it for 1,000 taels of silver. What a pity. He had originally planned to pay him more if he came to redeem it in the future. However, most of the things that were pawned in the pawn shop were equivalent to being sold. The possibility of redeeming them was very small. If he was lucky, he could make a net profit of 10,000 taels of silver. Although his heart ached, taking a step back, compared his life, none of this seemed that important. The burly man was being escorted by 2 bailiffs. Just as he was about to leave, he seemed to have thought of something. He stopped and said, "That's right, there's also a jade pendant. Since it's not worth much money, you could take it back as well. That way, you won't be able to say that I hid it from you." The burly man cupped his waist and said, "It's here. Brother Constable, help me take it." Hearing this, the middle-aged man's expression changed greatly. He immediately said, "Nonsense, I only lost my purse. How can there be any jade pendant? You stole it from someone else. You must have remembered wrongly." The burly man was stunned for a moment. He looked at the middle-aged man and said, "Don't tell me you're confused. You lost your jade pendant and forgot about it. Or you really want to postpone it and make me suffer a few more beatings." The middle-aged man forced himself to calm down and said, "Nonsense. Why would I harm you? Do you think I don't know if I lost the jade pendant or not?" The burly man turned to look at the bailiff and said, "Brother Constable, this guy may have really forgotten that the jade pendant is on my waist. Help me take it. He should remember it when he sees it." The bailiff looked at the 2 of them and felt a little surprised. He felt something from the bulge on the burly man's waist. Crack! The sound of porcelain shattering and tables and chairs overturning came from behind. The county magistrate didn't even bother to pat the dust off his body. He got up from the ground and ran in the direction of the door. He looked at the burly man and pointed at the jade pendant. He asked in shock, This jade pendant, where did you get it?" The burly man was stunned for a moment and looked at the middle-aged man in astonishment. At this moment, the purse in the middle-aged man's hand had fallen to the ground. His face was pale. Plop! His legs turned to jelly. He knelt on the ground and cried, "Sir, please spare my life. Tell me the truth." The county magistrate said sternly. Not long after, the county magistrate hurriedly walked out of the county office. He got on the sedan chair and urged, "Go to King Feng's mansion." King Feng's mansion was a very special existence in Feng Province. The highest official in Feng Province was the provincial governor, but in fact, it was King Feng's mansion that managed Feng Province. This was a special case in the Qi Kingdom. Although many princes had fiefs, most of them were remote territories. They only enjoyed rent and lived a good life, but they didn't have any real power. However, the 3rd prince, Zhao Yi, was not one of them. Among the more than 10 princes in the Qi Kingdom, he was the only one who had a fief as large as a prefecture and could personally manage the government affairs. He had the power to make some important decisions. The 3rd prince, Zhao Yi, had come to the fief when he was young. It took him more than 10 years to turn a medium-sized prefecture into one of the richest places in the Qi Kingdom. Not only did he have a high status in the hearts of the people in Feng Province, but he also had a great influence in the neighboring prefectures. At this moment, in King Feng's mansion, the prestigious 3rd prince had just put down a letter. Down below, Yang Yinzhou frowned and asked, "Your Highness, why has the 1st prince suddenly come to Feng Prefecture? Why?" Zhao Yi looked out of the window and said, "The imperial censor is accompanying him. He said he's inspecting the prefectures on behalf of my father. He'll arrive in Feng Province in a few days." Yang Yinzhou thought about it and said, "The 1st prince won't leave the capital easily. He's not here with good intentions. Your Highness, you should be prepared. This brother of mine," Zhao Yi sighed. Her tone was rather helpless as she said, "Is there still no news from Chong Province?" Yang Yinzhou nodded and said, "Not yet. However, according to the news from the Jing Kingdom, it seems that they haven't found him either. There are rumors that he might have met with misfortune." Zhao Yi shook his head and said, "That won't happen. If such a person died because of this, then God must be blind. I believe that we'll meet again one day." Yang Yinzhou didn't say anything. Thinking of that name, Some scenes emerged in his mind, and his expression became somewhat enlightened. After a long time, Lily was still as elegant as before. The two talked for a while, and then a servant outside the door reported, "The county magistrate of Feng City requests to see you. Greetings, Your Highness." The county magistrate of Feng City hurriedly came in and bowed to Zhao. "County Magistrate Wu, you don't have to be so courteous. Sit down." Zhao raised his hand and said, "May I know why County Magistrate Wu suddenly came to visit?" County Magistrate Wu respectfully presented a jade pendant with both hands and said, "Your Highness, this jade pendant was accidentally obtained from several bandits today." Yang Yinzhou was surprised. He looked at Zhao Yi and said, "Your Highness, isn't this the one that His Majesty rewarded you? It's the Huilong pendant." Zhao Yi took the jade pendant from County Magistrate Wu's hands and smiled. "He's here. Coming. Li Yi hurriedly walked into the kitchen. If he was a step late, he would have to make do with egg fried rice today. Mississippi Lu seemed to have made up her mind this time. She wouldn't stop until she made a dish that could be swallowed. She just felt pity for the ingredients that she had just thrown away as garbage. Some of them were really expensive. Thinking of the 5,000 taels of silver he had just received, he didn't feel so distressed. Out of the 10,000 taels of silver, he had to keep 1,000 taels of silver. When he left, he would redeem the jade pendant. If the old emperor remembered it one day, he couldn't use the excuse that the proud Lolita had lost it every time to fool him. Thinking of the jade pendant, he thought of the stingy pawnshop manager. The value of that jade pendant was certainly more than 1,000 taels of silver. But last time, he was in urgent need of money, so he was forced to cheat him. He had always cheated people, and those who cheated him would sooner or later suffer retribution. This was not the second time they met, and he had already lost something important. The next time they met, he would probably lose his head. Therefore, it was better to be upright. The heavens were watching, and it was not easy for him to hold on to the integrity of his heart. When the smell of burning came from the kitchen of the small courtyard again, in the prison of the county government, the pawnshop manager knelt on the ground and kept kowtowing. He said in a trembling voice, he was wearing a bamboo hat that day. I really didn't know his identity. Chapter 680. In the county jail, Zhao Yi, the third prince of the Qi kingdom, looked at the pawnbroker and asked, "Half a month ago he wore a bamboo hat and pawned this jade pendant for 1,000 taels of silver. Yes, he used a bamboo hat to cover his face, so I didn't see what he looked like, nor did I know who he was." The pawnbroker said in a trembling voice, "Everything I said is true. If there is any falsehood, may I be struck by lightning." Not long after, Zhao Yi came out of the cell, shook his head and said, "This dragon pendant was given to me by my father. It is worth 10,000 taels of gold, but I pawned it for 1,000 taels of silver. Brotherly, you look down on me too much." Yang Yinzhou stood beside him, thought for a moment, and said, "Your Highness, if that's the case, he should be in Fengzhou City now." Zhao Yi nodded and said, "He must know the value of this jade pendant, but he pawned it for only 1,000 taels of silver. He must be extremely short of money. He can't go back to the Jing kingdom for the time being, so it's normal for him to hide in the Qi kingdom. He shouldn't have left at this time." "Your Highness, who are you looking for? Do you want me to send someone?" County Magistrate Wu hesitated for a moment and said. Zhao Yi waved his hand and said, "No need. You don't need to ask about this matter. Remember to let the pawnbroker go later." County Magistrate Wu was stunned and said, "Your Highness, it's a big crime to hide a royal item. Are you going to let him go like this?" Zhao Yi smiled and said, "It doesn't matter. Just do as I said." County Magistrate Wu looked up at him and finally nodded and said, "Your Highness, I understand." As they walked out of the county office, Yang Yinzhou turned around and asked, "Your Highness, what if he doesn't redeem the jade pendant?" Zhao Yi looked at the endless stream of people on the street and said, "It's good that he went to redeem it, but it's expected that he didn't. Send more people to investigate in secret these days. Feng State City is not big, so if he is still in the city, we will find him sooner or later." Young Yinzhou nodded, and the two of them walked down the stairs. At the same time, in a courtyard a few streets away, Li Yi scratched his head in confusion. Although he had never paid much attention to the gifts bestowed by the old emperor, he still had some impression of them. Until now, he still couldn't remember when the old emperor had given him that jade pendant. After a while, he still had no clue. He shook his head and stopped thinking about these things. He had to quickly write out the 13 poems and then go out to buy groceries. All the vegetables at home had been ruined by Mississippi Lou. He had to buy some new ones and send the poem to her to get the remaining 5,000 taels of silver. After this, he would never sell his poems for money again. Not only Su Shi or Li Bai and Qin Guan, but also Lu Yong and Yin Jidao. Every time they wrote a sentence, Li Yi could feel the strong resentment from a different time and space. It's a disgrace, it's really a disgrace. It was not dark yet. Qian Duo stood at the entrance of the alley, waiting patiently. Only when night fell and his feet were about to go numb from standing, did a voice finally come from the alley. Money in one hand, goods in another. Did you bring the silver? Qian Duo was shocked and immediately said, yes. Something flew out of the darkness. Qian Duo reached out and caught it. He heard the voice say, here are 5 poems. You can check them first. Qian Duo walked to the side and opened it with the light of the lamp. There were a few words that he didn't know, but it should be the real thing. He walked back and handed a stack of banknotes in and said, this is the remaining 5,000 taels of silver. Brother, please count it. As soon as he finished speaking, he felt that his hand was empty. After a while, another roll of paper flew out. Money and goods are settled. Goodbye. Hearing the voice coming from the alley, Qian Duo hurriedly said, brother, please wait. The voice said, is there anything else? Qian Duo scratched his head and said, cash back. Do you want a copper coin? Even a copper coin is money. Qian Duo smiled embarrassedly and said, my father taught me since I was a child that every porridge and meal is hard-earned. I shouldn't spend money recklessly and should be thrifty. Even a copper coin is money. I deserve it. Why not want it? This time, the voice was silent for a long time before it spoke again. Sorry, there's no cash back this time. I used up my change when I bought vegetables just now. Buying vegetables? Qian Duo was stunned and looked ahead in surprise. However, there was no more sound coming from the darkness. Brother, remember that you still owe me a copper coin. Qian Duo shouted to himself. He carefully put away the poems and strode back. As Li walked on the street, he thought that he should have spared him his celery or something. He didn't like to owe people money. Even a copper coin was still a debt. For someone with obsessive-compulsive disorder, there was not much difference between a copper coin and 10,000 taels of silver. When he passed by a city gate, he saw the soldiers at the gate questioning passers-by in the dark. They seemed to be holding something like a portrait in their hands. They were probably chasing after some felons. It seemed that the public security in Fengzhou was not very good. It was better to be careful while walking alone on the street at night. The right thing to do was to go back and sleep with Mississippi Lou. In a restaurant, several dancers were dancing gracefully on a high stage. One of them had a slim figure and graceful movements, which attracted the attention of most people in the hall. A young man raised the wine glass in his hand and looked at Qian Duo as he said, Brother Qian, Miss Shi thanked you in front of everyone that day. It's a pity that you left early. Otherwise, something wonderful would have happened between you and Miss Shi that day. Don't you plan to seize the opportunity today? Qian Duo waved his hand and said, I just saw Miss Shi that day and couldn't help but compose a poem. There is no other meaning. Brother Qian is very talented. Your reputation has spread throughout Fengzhou. I admire you. A person cupped his hands and said, We have known each other for more than 10 years, but I didn't know that Brother Qian had such a talent for poetry. Brother Qian, you have hidden it well. The people around him were all friends that he had known for a long time. They were not like those pedantic scholars who only knew how to mock him. Qian Duo smiled and said, Don't be arrogant. Don't be arrogant. I am very low-key. One of them revealed an indignant expression and said, There are actually people who say that Brother Qian's poems were bought. Even Zhao Xiuan acknowledged Brother Qian's works and admitted that it would be difficult for him to surpass them. In the state of Qi, is there anyone who is more talented than him? Could it be that Brother Qian bought a poem from Zhao Xiuan? Yes, such a poem is probably a priceless treasure. How could it be bought with money? Another person agreed. Qian Duo shook his head and said in a low voice, "There is no such thing as a priceless treasure in this world. If 100 taels of silver isn't enough, 1,000 taels of silver is enough. If 1,000 taels of silver isn't enough, 1,000 taels of silver is enough. There has to be a price that matches it. I think that poem is only worth 1,000 taels of silver." Someone asked doubtfully, "Those poor people value their moral integrity more than their lives. Can this kind of poem be bought with money?" Qian Duo smiled and said, "There is nothing in this world that cannot be bought with money. If there is, it means that you did not pay enough." Someone asked in surprise, "Brother Qian, do you mean that you bought that poem?" "Of course not." Qian Duo shook his head and said, "I can easily write a dozen of those poems. Do I need to buy it?" Chapter 681. Cough. Brother Qian is talented. I admire you. The moment Qian Duo said this, the young men beside him were stunned for a moment before they immediately said with a smile. Almost all of their families were businessmen. Although they had been forced to study since they were young, it was difficult for them to even memorize books. They knew nothing about poems and essays. Because of this, they were looked down upon by those scholars. They naturally did not have a good impression of those people. They were happy to see Qian Duo write good poems and slap those people in the face. Of course, it was also because the Qian family was rich. Many of their families could only survive by relying on the Qian family. They had to fawn on the Qian family's young masters. My father often taught me to be low-key. I have talent. Will I tell you? Will I be like those poor bastards who spread it everywhere? I won't. Qian Duo stretched out his hand and pressed it down. He said, "It's fine if you know about these things. Don't spread it around. I don't like to be ostentatious. I don't know where he bought a poem from, but he's getting cocky." A cold snort came from the side. A green-robed scholar glanced over and said, "He really thinks he's a scholar. It's fine if he's trash who doesn't know anything about literature. But to take someone else's poem as his own, he's simply shameless." Who are you talking about? Before Qian Duo could speak, a person beside him stood up and turned around to look at him in dissatisfaction. The green-robed scholar smiled mockingly. He turned his head and said, "Who doesn't know shame? Who knows in their hearts? Don't you think so? If his heart is magnanimous, why would he be afraid of the words of others? I'm afraid some people have ulterior motives. Only knows if there are any ulterior motives." There were a few other similarly dressed men beside the green-robed scholar. At this moment, they all spoke, their tone full of mockery. Qian Duo stood up and walked over. He looked at the person from before and asked, "If his heart is magnanimous, he won't be afraid of the words of others?" The scholar nodded and said, "Of course." Qian Duo asked again, "Then are you magnanimous?" The man sneered and said, "We scholars have righteousness in our hearts. We do things in an upright manner. We are naturally magnanimous. You aren't afraid of the words of others?" "Not. Really impotent. No." As soon as the scholar opened his mouth, he realized that something was wrong. He swallowed the next word and looked at him coldly. "How could I fall for such a clumsy trick?" he said. "Since you don't care what others say." Qian Duo looked at him and said, "If I call you a son of a bitch, won't you be angry?" The scholar was startled. His face quickly turned from red to green. Pointing at him, he said, brat, you dare." Qian Duo looked at him and said, "Look, you don't even know how to scold people. Who is the trash? You dare to say that you're not a wastrel who spent money to buy poems?" The scholar's eyes were almost spitting fire as he said, "If you can compose another poem of that level on the spot, I, Wan Jun, will immediately kowtow to you and apologize for what I said before. Brother Wan, The expressions of the few scholars behind him changed as they hurriedly stepped forward and said worriedly, "Brother Juan, be careful with your words. If Chien Duo bought 2 poems instead of 1, Juan Jun would lose all his face from now on. He would never be able to raise his head in Feng State City again. You don't need to say anything more." Juan Jun waved his hand and said, "If he can buy 2 poems of that level, I will admit defeat this time. If he can't, I will expose this shameless wastrel to the public." "Are you sure?" Chien Duo looked at him and said, "If I can compose another poem, will you kowtow to me?" A scholar added, "It is to compose another excellent poem that everyone will agree with. If you make up a few lines, will Brother Juan still kowtow to you?" The commotion here had already attracted the attention of the people in the hall. Even the woman on the stage temporarily stopped her performance and looked over with a surprised and doubtful expression. "If that's the case, then let's bet." Chien Duo nodded as he looked at the stage and said, "I remember the first time I met Miss Fei Fei. The plumage dance is still fresh in my memory. I will give this poem to Miss Fei Fei." "Give it to me?" The woman on the stage was startled and couldn't come back to her senses for a while. Below the stage, there was already a voice coming out. "After a dream, the tower is locked high, and the curtains are lowered when I sober up. Last year's spring hate comes. Falling flowers stand alone, and swallows fly together in the rain. I remember the first time I met Fei Fei, wearing a robe with 2 hearts. The lute string speaks of yearning. The bright moon shines on the robe, and the rosy clouds return." The woman on the stage, called Fei Fei, was still wondering when she had worn a robe with 2 hearts. As for the lute, she didn't remember playing it often. She was good at the zither. Below the stage, the young man called Juan Jun was stunned on the spot. The expressions of the people behind him changed almost at the same time. They didn't expect Chien Duo to so easily throw out such a poem. The people around them were already whispering the lyrics, secretly comparing it to the previous song. They were both about singing girls, and the style was similar. The lyrics were similar. A person's style was usually fixed. At the same time, it was very difficult to change it. It was very easy for outsiders to tell if the 2 poems were written by the same person. Originally, they were almost certain that the Partridge Sky was bought by Chien Duo. However, at this moment, their hearts were a little shaken. After all, there were no scholars who had reached this level of talent who would be willing to sell their hard work. In reality, when one's literary talent reached this level, they would not lack money. 1 poem was already a little unbelievable, let alone 2. Chien Duo turned to look at Juan Jun and said, "How is it? This poem is not bad, right? What did Brother Juan say just now?" Juan Jun's expression changed. He couldn't tell which of the 2 poems was better. Because of personal preferences and other factors, no one could tell. Because of this, it meant that if Chien Duo made another poem that was similar to the previous one, he would have to kowtow to him and apologize. At this moment, someone behind Juan Jun suddenly said, "You bought 1, and you might have bought 2. Unless you take out another one, you still can't prove that these 2 poems were written by you. I knew you would be shameless." Chien Duo shook his head and said, "Then, how about you listen to this one?" After saying this, he opened his mouth again and said, "Red leaves, yellow flowers, autumn is late, 1,000 miles miss the traveler. Flying clouds end, returning to the swan with no letter. Where can I send a letter? Tears fall unceasingly by the window, like an inkstone turning to grind ink, gradually writing about parting. Deep in this love, the red paper is colorless." Juan Jun opened his mouth and his face was ashen. This time, he didn't say anything. The scholars behind him also had faces full of disbelief. How long had it been? Did he really think composing poems was like eating and drinking? The way the surrounding people looked at Chien Duo had already changed. He might have bought 1 or 2 poems, but he couldn't possibly tie up a talented scholar to write poems for him, right? Anyone who was involved in poetry could easily see that these 3 poems were obviously written by the same person. Such a talented scholar should have been famous throughout Phone Province. How could he work for someone else's disciple? Could it be that this young Master Qian, who had always been known as an idiot, had been hiding it all along? Astonished expressions appeared on more and more people's faces. He was also astonished. Other than astonishment, he was also gratified. This was because when he came back, he found that Mississippi Lou had actually washed all the dishes. In the past 2 years, this was the first time he saw her do such a thing. After putting away the groceries and the money, he chatted with Mississippi Lou for a while before going to bed. Among the 13 poems just now, more than 8 of them were written by Yan Jidao. Before going to bed, Li put his palms together and recited in his heart, "I'm forced to make a living. Brother Yin, don't blame me, don't blame me." Chapter 682. Wanjun's face was pale. He lowered his head and didn't say a word. The scholars behind him also lowered their heads and didn't say a word. Everyone, including the woman on the stage, looked at Qian Duoduo with unprecedented changes in their eyes. "Brother Wan, how is this poem? It's not bad, right?" Qian Duoduo looked at Wanjun and said, "I don't know why, but my thoughts are flowing like a spring today. Just now, I came across another poem. Brother Wan, do you want to help me appreciate it? You don't push me too far." Wanjun raised his head and widened his eyes, which were full of anger. Qian Duoduo looked at him and narrowed his eyes, saying, "Brother Wan, have you forgotten what you just said?" "I was wrong." Wanjun's expression changed. He said in a low voice and turned around, saying, "Let's go." Seeing that they were about to leave, one of the people behind Qian Duoduo wanted to stop them, but was stopped by him. Qian Duoduo waved his hand and said, "Forget about kowtowing. I don't want to have such an unfilial son." Many people looked at the backs of Wanjun and the others as they left with complicated expressions. If Wanjun really kowtowed and admitted his mistake tonight, he would lose all his face. After tomorrow, he would definitely become the laughing stock of Feng State City. Although he temporarily saved his face by leaving like this, it was inevitable that he would end up going back on his word. If Qian Duoduo was just an idiot and the poem was really bought, it would be fine. But he threw out 2 more poems just like that and shut everyone's mouth. With that kind of talent, how could he sell his poems to others for money? Unless he really kidnapped Zhao Xiuwen and forced him to write poems for him. Otherwise, he had always been low-key and never revealed anything. However, if it was the latter, what was the reason? One person looked at Qian Duoduo with eyes full of admiration and said, "Hey, Brother Qian, you just said that you have a new poem. Read it for us." "Read what?" Low-key, low-key." Qian Duoduo waved his hand and said, "We'll talk about it next time." Just now, he had desperately memorized 2 poems. When he read the first one, he almost read out the 2 words Xiaoping. If he hadn't remembered that there was an annotation below the sentence, where the word Xiaoping could be written with any woman's name, he would have almost made a fool of himself. He even marked out such details. That brother was really meticulous to the extreme. He could simply be called a businessman with a conscience. Let's go. Eating and drinking were not his goals. He had already done what he needed to do. Seeing those poor scholars suffer made him feel carefree. Qian Duoduo waved his hand and walked out of the door. "Young Master Qian, please wait." Qian Duoduo turned his head in confusion and saw the woman named Fei coming down. She smiled and said to him, "I wonder if Fei has the honor to invite Mr. Qian upstairs for a chat." Qian Duoduo was stunned and said, "Yes." Seeing the 2 of them walking up while talking and laughing, the people behind Qian Duoduo stood there in a daze. "Brother Qian, you guys go back first. I want to talk about poetry with Miss Fei." Qian Duoduo didn't look back. He waved his hand and said, "It's good to know how to write poems." Seeing the 2 of them enter a certain room, someone sighed and said with a sigh, "Before today, Qian Duoduo was still the same as them, relying on throwing money to attract the attention of these women. After today, he had completely left their ranks. Just like today, they could only sigh as they watched him and Miss Fei's back. Very quickly, the woman on the stage changed to another person. However, she did not receive much attention from the crowd.
It was unknown how many people were looking at the tightly shut door upstairs with complicated feelings. He pushed open the door and stretched comfortably. He let out a long breath of foul air and could not help but feel refreshed. The medicinal herbs must have really worked. These days, Mississippi Lou's body was recovering very quickly. Apart from being unable to use her vital chi, she was no different from a normal person in other aspects. At this rate, it would not be long before this trip to the Chi Kingdom came to a successful end. He had asked Lin Wanru before. The Lin family's caravan had no plans to go to the Jing Kingdom in the near future. Being in a foreign country, he could not find anyone he could trust to send a message. Thinking about it, the news that Rui and the others had received should only be the last time he and Mississippi Lou appeared in Shuzhou. The possibility of them finding this place was very small. He could not leave the injured Mississippi Lou here alone. There was no one he could use, so he could only put this matter aside for the time being. Li brothers, Miss wants to see you. Lin Yong's figure appeared at the door. Li waved his hand and said, "Got it. I'll go right away." These days, he had been meeting with Miss Lin almost every day. After learning how to use the debit and credit method, she took out all the previous accounts and calculated them one by one. Sometimes, when she encountered a problem, she would ask him for help. When walking into Fong Lin Garden, Li Yi's eyes inadvertently glanced around. A hint of surprise appeared on his face. He looked at Lin Yong and asked, "What about the horse stepping on swallows?" "It was sold." Hearing this, Lin Yong said somewhat gloomily, "Who sold it?" Li looked at him and asked. Of course it was Mississippi. Lin Yong sighed and said, "Although it was sold for a total of 13,000 taels, which is a profit of 5,000 taels, I just don't like that by guy. If it wasn't for him pestering us all day, Miss would definitely not have sold it." These days, business has not been as good as before. Believe in your Mississippi. It's good to sell it. Li Yi patted him on the shoulder and walked to a room in the backyard of the shop. That by guy really loved this Miss Lin. He fought to prevent losses for the Lin family. He was the most suitable spare tire. He knocked on the door, and a gentle voice came from inside. "Is it Li? Come in." Lin Wanru was sitting at the table and writing something seriously. Li Yi walked over and shook his head after glancing at it. That guy's surname, Qian, was really addicted to showing off. In just a few days, he had written 13 poems. It was extremely ostentatious. Did he really want to be the poet sage of the Qi Kingdom? Seeing him shake his head, Lin Wanru put down the pen and said with a smile, "It's not good." "I'm sorry." Li shook his head and said, "It's a lot better than before. I still have to thank you for your guidance." Lin Wanru stood up and said. She was very clear that her calligraphy could make such great progress in such a short period of time. It was all because of his advice from time to time. The more she interacted with him, the more she found that this scholar who was picked up had many unexpected things. First was his amazing calligraphy. Second was his culinary skills. He seemed to know some martial arts too. Even some of the views on business that he revealed in a few words were also a great inspiration to her. This always made her suspicious. Could it be that every scholar in Jingua was like this? Li Yi's gaze moved away from the poem she had copied and asked, "Is there something wrong with the accounts again?" Lin Wanru shook her head and said, "I actually invited you here because I have a presumptuous request." The concept of presumptuous request was too broad. Some things could be agreed to, and some could not be agreed to. After all, Mississippi Lou was still here, so he still had to pay attention to some things. "What is it?" Li looked at her and asked. He had to clarify whether he could agree to it or not. "There's an important meeting tomorrow night. Several big trading companies in Feng State will be participating. Brother Lin is straightforward, so it's not suitable for him to participate. I don't know if you have time." "I think that's it." "That's it." Li Yi nodded with some disappointment. "If it's tomorrow night, I should have time." Chapter 683. The meeting that Lin Wanru mentioned was actually a gathering of some rich businessmen in Fengzhou City. It was said that it would be held every once in a while. After all, doing business was not the business of one or two families.
Even top businessmen like the Qian family had to cooperate with others, let alone the Lin family, who could not avoid these necessary social interactions. As the guard of the Lin family, Lin Yong was also Lin Wanru's bodyguard most of the time. He would follow her on some important occasions. In the previous meeting, because a certain wealthy merchant said some inappropriate words to Lin Wanru, he was violently beaten up by the furious Lin Yong on the spot. Later on, the Lin family paid a price to settle the matter with great difficulty. Although there weren't any serious consequences, from then on, Lin Wanru didn't dare to bring him to similar occasions anymore. Lin Wanru had just briefly mentioned these things to him. Compared with Lin Yong, who was a hothead, he looked gentle and modest. He knew how to do business. Most importantly, he was handsome and could be taken out to meet people. He was the best choice to take his family on a trip to a banquet. The reason why he agreed to take her along was that they had become familiar with each other these days. It was not a good idea to refuse such a small matter. Secondly, it was boring to go to bed early every night. It was good to go out occasionally to change the mood. The place they were going to tomorrow was a small manor of the Qian family in the city. Every banquet was held by several top businessmen in turn. Small families like the Lin family were only qualified to participate. The host of this banquet was the Qian family. Recently, the Qian family was very famous in Fengzhou City. Before this, the Qian family was well known because they were rich. Recently, they became famous because they had an evildoer. This evildoer was called Qian Duo. More than a dozen shocking poems were thrown out, which made him completely popular in Fengzhou City. Everyone knew that Zhao Xiuwen was the sage of poetry of the Qi Kingdom. He was a role model for scholars, and he was the top scholar in the 5th year of Xinghe. Now, he was assisting the 3rd prince in Feng Province. Everyone knew about his talent. However, in recent days, Qinduo's name had almost overshadowed Zhao Xiuwen's reputation in Feng Prefecture City. After being ridiculed for more than 10 years, he had also been labeled as an idiot for more than 10 years. After enduring patiently for more than 10 years, he suddenly shocked everyone and completely subverted everyone's understanding of him. There were many people who had doubts about this, but there were also some people who believed that the Qian family had really produced a Qilin son this time. Xiuwen, what do you think? Yang Yinzhou asked Zhao Xiuwen after flipping through a book of poems. Great literary talent. Zhao Xiuwen also held a similar booklet in his hand. He nodded his head and said, 13 poems, each of which is an excellent work. Yang Yinzhou shook his head and asked, do you really believe that these poems were written by Qian Duo in 5 days? For a poem of this level, even I would have to spend a long time to craft it. It's not like you, and I don't know what the son of the god of wealth is like. Zhao Xiuwen put down the book of poems and said, there must be an expert behind him, but I still can't figure it out. From his poems, I can see that he must be a proud person. Why would he give away his painstaking efforts? Could it really be just for money? Yang Yinzhou asked doubtfully. The important thing is, when did such a talent appear in Feng Province? Zhao Xiuwen smiled and said, I might have to go to the Qian family in a few days. Speaking of which, he is also in Feng Province. Yang Yinzhou thought about it and said, could it be him? Zhao Xiuwen raised his eyebrows and asked, if it was him, it would not be difficult for him to write these poems. But why would he give them to a stranger? It's not a gift. Yang Yinzhou looked at him and said, when he first arrived in Feng Province, he pawned the 3rd prince's jade pendant. He must be in desperate need of money. With his style of doing things, it is not strange at all that he would do such a thing. Zhao Xiuwen frowned and asked, even if he was in need of money, he is a proud scholar. How could he? Xiuwen, you still don't know him very well. Yang Yinzhou smiled and said, years ago in Qing, in Prefecture, he wrote the Immortal on the Magpie Bridge on the prayer lantern. It was picked up by someone and spread out. At the Mid-Autumn Poetry Meet, he used the Shuijiao Gedo to win 200 taels of silver. At King Ming's mansion, he used the phrase, writing new poems to express his worries, and made many scholars lose face. A dozen poems caused the reputation of the goddess of water to spread to the Qi Kingdom. But what you don't know, Xiuwen, is that he casually gave those poems to a woman. Now that I think about it, when he was in need of money, it is not strange that he used these poems to exchange for money. Yang Yinzhou smiled bitterly and said, even though I don't want to admit it, to him, poems seem to be something that he did casually. Which scholar doesn't view their proud works as treasures? But he didn't care at all. Just this point alone is something that I will not be able to do in my lifetime. If it really was him, Zhao Xuan looked out the window and said, I have to go to the Qian family today. In a gorgeous manor somewhere in Fengzhou City, a fat middle-aged man with a big belly walked out of the door. He looked at the two young men and said with a bit of surprise, what kind of wind is blowing today? How come you two are here? Zhao Xuan cupped his hands and said, I took the liberty to come here. Money God, please don't be offended. The fat middle-aged man waved his hand and said, don't be offended. Please come in quickly. Perhaps not many people knew the name of this middle-aged fatty, but if one mentioned his nickname, almost everyone in Feng State City would know about it. Money God, the master of the Qian family, started from scratch. In just a short period of more than 10 years, he had accumulated countless family wealth. People only knew that the Qian family was very rich, but they didn't know how much money they had. Therefore, they simply called him Money God, which showed the wealth of the Qian family. In a spacious hall in the manor, the three of them sat as guests and hosts. Money God took a sip of tea and looked at the two people and asked, did the third prince make any arrangement for you two to come here this time? Yang Yinzhou shook his head and said, the third prince did not make any arrangements. What are you doing here if he didn't make any arrangements? Money God was startled. He stood up and said, I am very busy here. In the time it takes to drink a cup of tea with you, a few hundred taels of silver are gone. Zhao Xuan stood up and said, Money God, if you have something to do, go do it. This time we are here to find your son. Money God's face showed vigilance, and he asked, why are you looking for Duo? Did he get into trouble outside again? It's not that he got into trouble. Zhao Xuan looked at him and said, there is something that I want young Master Qian to clarify. Money God's face became more vigilant, and he said, you two are good enough to be my Master Duo's teachers. What kind of thing can you need my Master Duo to clarify? Zhao Xuan's face showed helplessness. He turned his head and looked at Yang Yinzhou and said, Yinzhou, you tell him, there are 10,000 taels of silver here, enough to buy 13 songs. Next time, you can't be so impulsive. Release one song every 3 days. Well, that's it. In a room, a slightly fat young man pressed a stack of silver notes under his pillow and whispered, I have to save money for a while. I can't let father know. Young master. A servant's voice came from outside the door. Qian Duo put down the quilt, walked over, opened the door, and asked, what's the matter? The servant immediately said, young master, the master wants you to go over. Qian Duo frowned and asked, isn't my father busy at night now? What does he want me to do? The servant replied, I don't know. There were 2 guests at home just now, so the master came over and asked me to call you over. Qian Duo waved his hand and said, lead the way. He was thinking about how to see his brother again. Under the guidance of the servant, he soon came to a hall. He raised his head and looked at the middle-aged man sitting in the chair and asked, Father, why are you looking for me? Qian Duo looked at him with a black face and asked, tell me, what have you done in the past few days? Tell me honestly. No. Qian Duo was stunned for a moment and said, I've been fine these days. I haven't caused any trouble. Bastard, you still don't admit it. Qian Duo stood up from the chair, pointed at his nose, and scolded, I haven't paid attention to you for a few days. You've grown up. Instead of learning how to do business with me, you actually went to write poems. Why did you write such useless things? Don't tell me that you want to be the top scorer. Instead of doing proper things, you have to go to these crooked ways. Even if you become the top scorer, what can you do? You're still a good-for-nothing. On the side, Yang Yinzhou and Zhao Xuan looked at each other and took a deep breath at the same time. The two extremely self-restrained top scorers finally calmed down a little.
Chapter 684. Dad, I know I was wrong. Duo lowered his head and said sincerely. When it came to this kind of topic, he never argued with his father. Otherwise, it would cause even more serious consequences. You have to remember that you will inherit the Qian family in the future. Don't go down the wrong path. Duo nodded with satisfaction. Then he turned his head and looked at Yang Yinzhou and Zhao Xuan. He said, "Okay, Tu Zhuangyuan, if you have anything to say, you can ask now." When he called them Zhuangyuan, Yang Yinzhou and Zhao Xuan didn't have any special feelings in their hearts. At this moment, when he mentioned it again, they felt an inexplicable irony. Suppressing this strange thought, Yang Yinzhou looked at Duo and said, "I just want to ask young Master Qian, the 14 poems that have been circulating recently, were they written by you?" As his voice fell, Zhao Xuan also looked over. "What do you mean?" Duo frowned and said, "My poems, of course, were written by me. This is not a business. Can I buy them from others?" Zhao Xuan glanced at him and said, "This is a matter of great importance. I hope young Master Qian can answer truthfully." Duo curled his lips and said, "What do you mean, truthfully?" "This was originally written by me." Zhao Xuan cupped his hands and said, "Since young Master Qian can write such excellent works, you must have a lot of works in your daily life. Brother Yang and I are also people who love poetry. Young Master Qian, why don't you take it out and let us appreciate your literary talent?" "Damn, I was careless." Duo cursed in his heart. At that time, he should have spent another 10,000 taels of silver to buy 100 poems that were worth 100 taels of silver. If he was unhappy, he could have spent one. And if he was happy, he could have spent two. Then he wouldn't have encountered this embarrassing situation. Ahem. He covered his mouth and coughed dryly. He said, "Writing poetry relies on inspiration. To be honest, I haven't written before." Suddenly, one day, when I woke up, there was a strange feeling in my mind. I felt like my thoughts were flowing and my writing was spirited. Duo sighed and said, "This feeling will appear every few days. I don't know when it will appear again." Zhao Xuan and Yang Yinzhou were stunned for a moment. Although some masterpieces relied on a momentary flash of inspiration, the prerequisite was that one had to accumulate enough experience to support such momentary inspiration. He was originally an idiot, and suddenly wrote so many terrifying poems. That flash of inspiration had to be flashing from morning to night. Zhao Xuan looked back at Fortune God of Money and asked, "Fortune God of Money." Money God of Fortune waved his hand and said, "Whether you believe it or not, I believe it." Yang Yinzhou suddenly turned his head to look at him and said, "This matter is related to an important matter for His Highness. We must know who wrote this poem." "Really?" Fortune God of Money's face froze. "Of course," Yang Yinzhou said. Money God of Fortune nodded, turned to Duo and asked, "Tell me, who bought those poems from?" Seeing the God of Fortune's serious face, Duo showed a hint of hesitation on his face. How much did it cost?" Duo looked up again and said helplessly, 10,000 taels. 10,000 taels, and you bought a few lousy poems." Money God of Money's eyes widened. "You prodigal son of 8B***. Money God of Money, many of those poems are enough to be passed down through the ages. They are worth far more than 10,000 taels." Zhao Xuan finally couldn't help but speak. Money God of Money waved his hand and said, "I don't care if it's passed down or not. Throwing out 10,000 taels of silver without making a sound is not the style of my Qian family." Then he looked at Duo and said angrily, "Tell me honestly, who sold these poems to you?" Duo sighed and said helplessly, I don't know. You said you didn't even see the person's face, let alone know who he is. You just gave him 10,000 taels of silver. Aren't you afraid that he will cheat you?" Money God of Money rubbed his eyebrows and asked again. Duo said, "But it turns out that the brother did not cheat me. B***, you're still in the right." Money God of Money was so angry that the fat on his face trembled a few times. At this time, an old servant walked in from outside the door and said, "Master,
The Zhou family and the Huang family are here. I'll deal with you when I'm done tonight. The Zhou family and the Huang family both had major cooperation with the Qian family. Their family's financial resources were similar to the Qian family's, so they could not be neglected. Money God of Money glared at Qian Duo and said to Yang Yinzhou and Zhao Xiuwen, I have important guests to entertain now. You guys sit here for a while. Zhao Xiuwen nodded and said, Money God of Money, go ahead. We still have some details to ask young Master Qian. Seeing Money God of Money leave, Qian Duo obviously relaxed. He sat on the chair next to him, shrugged at the two of them, and said, I just told you everything I know. There's nothing more. I don't know how to contact him. It's useless to ask me. A trace of doubt appeared on Zhao Xiuwen's face. He asked, You just said that the person who sold you the poems was called Li Han? Qian Duo took a sip of tea, nodded, and said, Yes, he said that he would not change his name or his surname. It should not be false. Prince Jin, Li Han. Yang Yinzhou nodded and said, It should not be false. A trace of joy appeared on Zhao Xiuwen's face. He looked at Qian Duo and said, Describe the situation again. Qian Duo's face showed an impatient expression. He waved his hand and said, How many times have I said that I really don't know where he is? I have already told you what I should tell you. You can go and find him. Why are you staying at my house? Li Yi once heard people say that among the many mansions in Fengzhou City, the one with a silver lion at the door was the Qian family. At that time, he thought that it was not symmetrical. He imagined the image of a silver lion squatting in front of the Qian family's door. He felt awkward for a while. When he arrived at the Qian family, he found that there was not one lion, but two. If he had known that there would be such a thing, he would not have sold his poems. With this lion, he could have anything he wanted. He looked back at Lin Wanru and asked, Is this lion really made of pure silver? Everyone in Fengzhou City knows about the Qian family's silver lion. Lin Wanru nodded and said, Let's go in. The Qian family was indeed the Qian family. Even the gate was higher than the two next to it. There were a lot of servants at the door to greet the guests. After handing over the invitation, they were welcomed in. Lin Wanru obviously had some connections in Fengzhou. Along the way, many people greeted them with a smile, especially some young men. Their tone and expressions were even more attentive. There were quite a number of young people here today, and they were not like what Li Yi had imagined, a group of middle-aged, balding, successful people. Of course, there were also some people who came with their elders. In this kind of occasion, it was beneficial to accumulate more connections. Wanru, over here. A voice came from not far away. Li Yi turned his head and saw young master by walking over with a smile on his face. However, the smile on his face quickly disappeared. He looked at Li Yi and turned to look at Lin Wanru. He asked suspiciously, Why is he here? Brother Bai. Lin Wanru nodded at him and said, I invited Li to come with me. Excuse me. She bowed slightly and turned back to smile at Li Yi. She said, Let's go over there. The young man with the surname Bai stood in the same place and looked back. When he saw the two disappearing figures, his expression began to change. Brother Bai, who was the person beside Miss Wanru just now? I don't think I've seen him before. A young man walked over from the side with a puzzled expression. Bai Yu smiled and said, I don't know. I'm not familiar with him. He should be someone from the Lin family. The man smiled and patted his shoulder. It's been so long, but you still haven't won Miss Lin's heart. Brother Bai, you have to work hard. Bai Yu smiled and didn't say anything. However, when the man turned around and left, a trace of darkness quickly appeared on his face. As the two of them walked out, the surroundings immediately became restless. Is that young Master Zhao and young Master Yang? Why are they here? Young Master Zhao and young Master Yang are His Highness's right-hand men. Fortune God Qian and them seem to be very familiar. Why do you think the Qian family has been so successful in Fengzhou for so many years? If they didn't have the third prince's support, hearing the quiet discussions of the crowd, Li Yi's expression froze. He then lowered his head and rubbed the space between his brows. There was too much information. He needed to process it all.
Yang Yinzhou, Zhao Shouwen, Fortune God Qian, they were all the third prince's men of the Qi kingdom. Fengzhou was the territory of the third prince, Zhao Yi. His manor was in Fengzhou City. Did this mean that he had been in front of the third prince of the Qi kingdom all this time? Back when he was still in the capital, the third prince had specially paid him a visit. He gave him a jade pendant and said something sincere. He probably meant that if he couldn't survive in the Jing kingdom, he could go to the Qi kingdom and rely on him. The two of them would hold hands and do something spectacular. But for now, Li didn't have such a plan. If he had directly revealed his identity, his current situation would naturally be much better. But he was afraid that in the future, he would be under the control of others in everything he did. The day when he could return to the Jing kingdom was even more distant. If he had known that he would meet them here, he wouldn't have come out. The current situation was still passable. Based on Mississippi Lou's recovery speed, they would probably be able to set off for home in another 2 or 3 months. Before that, they couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Speaking of which, the jade pendant that Zhao Yi gave him was lost. It seemed that it was taken by Mississippi Lou on that day, and he hadn't seen it since. As if he had thought of something, Li's face revealed a startled expression. Not long after, he sighed. He was afraid that he would not be able to redeem the jade pendant that he had borrowed from Miss Lu. Even the pawn shop from before could not be used again. Fortunately, he was wearing a bamboo hat at that time, and the shopkeeper did not see his face. Otherwise, he would be in trouble now. What's wrong? Lin Wanru walked over and asked when she saw that he didn't look right. Li pointed and said, "Those 2 people over there." Lin Wanru looked over and said, "You mean Zhao Shouwen and Yang Yinzhou? They are very famous in Feng Province. Zhao Shouwen is even known as the role model of scholars. He is well known in the entire Qi kingdom. It's normal for these people to surround them." Li looked at her and asked with some uncertainty, "Is the third prince of the Qi kingdom also in Feng Province?" Lin Wanru nodded and said, "Feng Province is the third prince's fief. King Feng's mansion is in Feng Province." After confirming everything from Lin Wanru, Li looked in that direction and watched Zhao Shouwen and Yang Yinzhou leave surrounded by people. Then, he withdrew his gaze. Seeing that Lin Wanru was also looking in that direction, he asked curiously, "Don't you like Zhao Shouwen? Why don't you go over?" Lin Wanru shook her head and said, "I just admire his literary talent. I don't like him." Seeing that she seemed to be a little annoyed, Li said, "What did you talk about just now? What's wrong? Did it not work out?" Lin Wanru shook her head and said, "I don't know why, but the Ma family and the Su family increased the price of raw materials by 10%. In Feng Province, apart from these 2 families, only the Bai family can provide raw materials to make jewelry. Fragrant Forest Garden has always been working with these 3 families. If we don't want to lose our profits, we can only choose the Bai family. However, it is very likely that the Bai family is behind this. After they achieve this goal, they will definitely have other tricks up their sleeves. If we put all our hopes on the Bai family, we will definitely be led by the nose in the future." Li looked at her and asked, "What do you plan to do?" Lin Wanru shook her head and said, "At present, there is still a lot of stock in the shop. It can support us for a while. We will think of a way when the time comes." Li could not help her with this matter. He still had a lot of things to solve. Feng Province, the third prince. Things in this world were really coincidental. The so-called meeting was extremely boring. The only thing he gained was some information that was very important to him. Lin Wanru took out the booklet again and picked up a pen from the table. She seemed to be calculating something. After a while, she flipped through the booklet, stood up, and looked around. "What's wrong? Did you lose something?" Li looked at her and asked. "The piece of paper you just used to demonstrate." Lin Wanru said. She saw a fat man not far away pick up an item from the ground and said, "I found it. It's over there." When she was about to walk over, a hand reached out from the side and held her wrist. "Sit down." Li looked over and said in a low voice. Not far away, the fat middle-aged man was holding a piece of paper in his hand and looking at it carefully. Chapter 686. Regular gatherings of this nature were not just for a chat or a meal. The people present were businessmen of all sizes. If they got along well with each other and had the same opinion, it was very likely that a partnership could be finalized on the spot. Some of the decisions made by the top businessmen could even affect the economic direction of the entire Phone province in the future. This was the main purpose of this kind of banquet. Therefore, there were pens and paper everywhere in the manor. From time to time, people could be seen writing and calculating, discussing the distribution of profits, and so on. It was unknown whether everyone was like Lin Wanru, who had the habit of carrying a small notebook with her. Not only did it have the function of memo, but it could also record ideas and inspirations at any time. Lin Yong had once said that many of the jewelry styles in Fonglin Park were personally designed by her. Not only that, but she could also take out a small notebook and pretend to ask questions to cover up her embarrassment. However, the piece of paper that had just fallen out was not a jewelry style, nor was it a memo. It was a classic model of the debit and credit bookkeeping method that he had listed. "What's wrong?" Lin Wanru looked at him in surprise and asked doubtfully. "Just sit there and don't move." Li Yi threw a small piece of watermelon into his mouth and glanced in the direction of the fat man. Lin Wanru whispered, "That is the master of the Qian family. People call him the god of wealth." As soon as she finished speaking, the fat middle-aged man put the piece of paper in his sleeve and looked around. After a long time, he turned around and walked to a brighter place in the house. According to the usual practice, every meeting would last more than 2 hours. Most of the time, people would communicate in groups of 3 to 5. At the end of the meeting, some big businessmen with status would routinely say a few words, and so on. Some people left in high spirits, while others returned disappointed. Every meeting would change the economic structure of Phone Province in the future, big or small. "Just now? Why didn't you let me go?" At the entrance of Fonglin Park, Lin Wanru, who had been silent all the way, finally asked the question in her heart. Li looked at her and asked, "You haven't told anyone about that method, right?" "No." Lin Wanru shook her head. "That's good." Li knocked on the courtyard door, turned around and said, "Forget about this matter, and don't let anyone know that you know that method, at least not now." The confusion on Lin Wanru's face deepened. Just as she was about to ask again, the courtyard door opened from the inside. "See you tomorrow." Li Yi waved at her, turned around, and walked in. Lin Wanru stood rooted to the ground for a long time before she shook her head and decided not to think about this matter for the time being. She turned around and said to the Lin family guards, "Let's go back as well." "Why'd you come back so late?" Mississippi Lou covered her mouth, and her voice was full of tiredness. "That fatty took too long." Li handed her a bag of things and said, "That store's preserved fruit is quite delicious. Try it." "It's too late. We'll talk about it tomorrow." Mississippi Lou took the paper bag, opened it, put a piece of dried fruit in her mouth, and turned to walk into the house. Li looked down and found that her ankles were bare. He shook his head and said, "The ground is dirty. Next time you come out, remember to wear shoes." He walked into the house. The light in the room was on, but it was soon extinguished. In the Qian family, under the bright lights, the fat face of the Qian god of fortune was full of spirit. "Good stuff, good stuff." He patted his thigh and couldn't help but exclaim. Qian Duo came over and asked, "Dad, what's the good stuff?" The Qian god of fortune waved his hand and said, Go to the accounting room and bring me last month's account book." Qian Duo asked doubtfully, "Dad, what do you want the account book for?" "Go," the Qian god of fortune said impatiently. Qian Duo immediately stood up and trotted outside. Not long after, he carried a stack of accounts and walked in, huffing and puffing. "Put it here." The Qian god of fortune pointed to the table next to him and moved the lamp to his side. Qian Duo moved a chair and sat down opposite him, looking at him with puzzled and curious eyes. The Qian god of fortune took the pen and ink, spread out a piece of paper, opened 2 account books, and recorded something on the paper from time to time. Qian Duo looked at the opposite side with his hand supporting his chin. He only saw the pages turning and the lights flickering.
After a while, his eyelids became heavy. Clatter. The sky was bright. Chien Duo rubbed his head, got up from the ground, straightened the chair, and finally wiped the remaining saliva from the corner of his mouth. When he looked up, he was surprised and said, "Dad, you didn't sleep last night?" As his voice fell, the Chien god of fortune put down the pen, raised his arm, stretched his waist, and sighed. "I'm old. It's only one night, and my body can't stand it anymore." Chien Duo hurried over and gently beat his shoulder. "Good stuff." The Chien god of fortune picked up a piece of paper from the table and said, "Chien Da Tong, Zheng Xian, Ma Wei. Duo, tell them to call these managers for me." Chien Duo nodded and said, "Okay, Dad, you go and rest for a while. I'll go right away." The Chien god of fortune rubbed his eyebrows, but he did not rest. He picked up another piece of paper, touched the short beard on his chin, and wrote on it. After a while, Chien Duo came in from outside and said, "Dad, they're here." The Chien god of fortune waved his hand and said, "Okay, you go out first." Chien Duo looked at him with some doubts. When he left, he closed the door. A middle-aged man in the middle of the three said with a smile, "I don't know why the shopkeeper is looking for us." The Chien god of fortune glanced at them and asked faintly, "Da Tong, how long have the three of you been with me?" In reply to the shopkeeper, 5 years. A trace of doubt appeared on the middle-aged man's face, and then he said. The two people looked at each other, and a trace of joy quickly appeared on their faces. The shopkeeper rarely asked these questions. Did he want to promote the old people of the Chamber of Commerce? 5 years. The Chien god of fortune sighed and said, "In 5 years, even a dog knows how to wag its tail. How can I raise you 3 ungrateful wolves?" When he said this, he stood up from the chair, and the momentum of his whole body suddenly changed. The bodies of the 3 people trembled. When they looked up, they seemed to see a mountain pressing down from the front. In the early morning, Li opened the door. The street was already full of pedestrians, and the Fonglin Yuan next to it had already opened. He came back very late yesterday, and he was tossed around by Mississippi Lou until late at night, saying that he woke her up and that she wanted to listen to some martial arts story. Li covered his mouth and yawned. When he was about to turn around and go back, he saw Lin Wanru coming from a distance. "Good morning, Miss Lin." Li waved to her from a distance. Last night, he didn't explain too much to her. The power of debit and credit was more powerful than the power of heaven's punishment. If it was not handled properly, people might die. Without enough strength, it was better not to get involved. This matter had already been confirmed in the Jing Kingdom. "Morning." Lin Wanru nodded slightly to him, walked past him, and walked into the shop. When he shook his head and planned to go back to prepare breakfast for Mississippi Lou, who had not yet gotten up, Lin Yong's loud voice came from the shop next to him. Go, go, go. What Great Britain and Little Britain. If you want to eat, go somewhere else. Don't disturb our business." Li's footsteps stopped. Chapter 687. Did you hear that? Go, go. In the shop in Fonglin Garden, Lin Yong waved his hand impatiently at the beggars in front of him and said, "It's not time to eat yet. There's no extra food here for you." Lin Wanru walked in from outside and happened to see Lin Yong driving away the beggars. She thought for a moment and said, "Brother Lin, go buy a few steam buns for them and let them go." Lin Yong took out a dozen copper coins from his waist and slapped them on the table in front of him. He said, Take it. Don't make trouble here." "We're not here to make trouble here." The leader, a man with unkempt hair and a dirty face, stammered, "We want to do business with you." Lin Yong rolled up his sleeves and said, "I've given you the money. Go quickly. Don't make trouble here. If you don't leave, don't blame me for being rude." "Brother Lin, I'll leave it to you," Lin Wanru said and walked toward the backyard. When she came in just now, she seemed to have heard a familiar word from Lin Yong, but it just flashed in her mind and disappeared. She couldn't remember it no matter how hard she tried. She shook her head and stopped thinking about it. The Ma family and the Su family had cut off the source of raw materials for Fonglin Garden. This matter had to be resolved as soon as possible. Otherwise, the Lin family stock would not last long.
We're from Great Britain. Seeing that the beggars still dared to talk nonsense, Lin Yong finally showed a hint of anger on his face. When he was about to raise his head and roll up his sleeves, a voice came from outside the door. You're from Great Britain? He walked in from outside the door and looked at the unkempt man. He asked, the United Kingdom of Northern Ireland? How did you? The man in the lead looked shocked and almost blurted out. He suddenly changed his words halfway and said, how do you know our country? He asked with a smile. How is Queen Elizabeth? The men trembled slightly, and the way they looked at him immediately changed. Lin Yong scratched his head, walked over and asked, Lee brothers, what are you talking about? Is there really something big? Great Britain? What does the Queen mean? Can a woman be a king? How come I've never heard of it? You'll know if you read more books. He nodded. In their country, a woman can be the emperor. There's such a thing in the world. Lin Yong's face was full of shock. It was obvious that his worldview had been turned upside down. He asked, then can their empress have many husbands? Can she handle it alone? Lin Yong's focus was always so unique. He shook his head and said, it's not mentioned in the book. I've only seen descriptions of Great Britain in books before. This is the first time I've met them. I have to find a place to understand the customs of Great Britain. As for whether their queen can handle it, I'll help you ask later. Li looked at them and said, guys, do you want to go next door and sit down? The man with unkempt hair and dirty face proudly said, you will certainly fall for the glory of the rising sun city. Watching him go out, Lin Yong seemed to think of something. He ran to the door and shouted, Li brothers, don't forget to ask for me. Got it. He waved his hand to him and closed the courtyard door. Who are you? The moment he closed the courtyard door, the men immediately raised their heads and looked at him vigilantly. The man in the lead said in a deep voice, you, how do you know Elizabeth? All right. Are you tired of talking like this? He waved his hand. He stretched one hand to his ear, and a thin layer of something was torn off his face. The man in the lead was stunned, and his face instantly showed surprise. He asked, young master, why are you here? Who are they? Mississippi Lou came out of the house and looked at the several people in the courtyard. She held autumn water in her hand. This subordinate greets the Union Lord. Several members of the Lou Alliance saw her and immediately bowed. Their voices were loud and resounded throughout the courtyard. Li brothers, what's the situation inside? What are their names? Lin Yong's voice came from outside. Li Yi replied loudly, it's nothing. They said that their queen also has 3 palaces and 6 courtyards and 72 concubines, similar to our emperor here. 3 palaces and 6 courtyards and 72 concubines. Lin Yong touched his chin and thought of the picture of many women entangled together. He couldn't help but lick his lips suddenly, as if he remembered something. He looked up and asked, 3 palaces and 6 courtyards and 72 concubines. Are they men or women? Men. A voice soon came from the courtyard. Men. Lin Yong touched his chin again. The next moment, his body trembled and his face suddenly turned pale. Don't you have a few hundred taels of silver in the time it takes to drink a cup of tea? Why do you have time to come here today? In King Feng's residence, he looked at a fat man and asked with a smile, silver is important, but how can it compare to your highness's important matter? Money God of Wealth stood up from his chair and said, this time, I came to show something to your highness. Could it be another rare treasure? He looked at him and smiled. If that's the case, Yinzhou, Showen, you two come over too. Let's see what kind of rare thing Money God of Wealth has this time. Money God of Wealth shook his head and took out an item from his sleeve. He handed it to Zhao Yi and said, your highness, this is it. Zhao Yi opened the box and saw that there was only a piece of paper inside. He picked it up in confusion and looked at it. He shook his head and said, don't keep me in suspense. Could it be that this piece of paper is a treasure? Money God of Wealth nodded and said, this piece of paper is indeed a treasure. At this time, Zhao Yi also became interested. He looked at him and said, since it is a treasure, tell me, what is its use? Money God of Wealth said slowly, its use is to make Qi Kingdom free of corruption
and the government offices free of parasites. The officials are self-disciplined, the national treasury is full, and the whole world is clean. After being stunned for a while, Zhao Yi looked at him with a strange light in his eyes and asked word by word, "Is this true?" Money God of Wealth nodded and said yes. Zhao Yi waved his hand and said, "Yinzhou Xiuan, come over and have a look." Although Yang Yinzhou and Zhao Xiuan were both well-known talents in Qi Kingdom, they also realized the importance of this piece of paper after Money God of Wealth's explanation. When it came to things like accounts, businessmen were more sensitive. Money God of Wealth is worthy of being called Money God of Wealth. Yang Yinzhou saluted him and said, "If this method can be implemented, Money God of Wealth will take the lead. Is there really such a strange thing? It can make Qi Kingdom free of corruption and the government offices free of parasites. The officials are self-disciplined, the national treasury is full, and the whole world is clean." As a voice came from outside the door, several figures came in from outside. The one walking in front was a young man in luxurious clothes. At this moment, he was looking at them with sharp eyes. His Royal Highness Prince Hung. First Prince. Money God of Wealth's face showed doubt, while Yang Yinzhou and Zhao Xiuan's expressions changed slightly. "I didn't know that you were coming. Zhao Yi didn't go out to meet you. I hope you don't take offense," Zhao Yi said slowly with a smile on his face. "It's okay." The young man in luxurious clothes waved his hand and turned back to look at Money God of Wealth. He asked again, "What you said just now, is it true? With just this piece of paper, you can completely wipe out the corrupt officials and restore Daki to a clean country?" Money God of Wealth glanced at Zhao Yi out of the corner of his eye. After a moment, he nodded slightly. After temporarily sending away the foreign businessmen, when Li Yi walked back, Lin Wanru walked out of the shop. She still hadn't let go of something in her heart. She looked at him and asked, "If the method of checking accounts is known, what will happen?" "Actually, it's nothing." Li Yi looked at her and said, "At most, the situation will be unstable. The whole country will be in turmoil. Heads will fall and blood will flow like a river." Chapter 688. I failed to stop the first prince and ruined your highness's plan. Please punish me, your highness. In a hall of the prince's mansion, more than 10 guards of King Feng's mansion knelt in a row. They looked extremely remorseful. The third prince, Zhao Yi, waved his hand and said, "Get up. If my brother wants to force his way in, you can't stop him." Fortune God of Qian walked forward and said, "Your highness, although the first prince took that piece of paper, what was recorded on it was very simple. Ordinary people couldn't understand it at all. I can write a more detailed version now. That's not the most important thing." Zhao Yi looked out of the window and pondered. After a while, he said, "Even if this method is effective in punishing corrupt officials, we can't be too hasty. We have to do it step by step and plan slowly. Otherwise, I'm afraid the disadvantages will outweigh the advantages. More than half of the imperial court will be involved. At that time, the situation will be out of control." Fortune God of Qian looked puzzled. Yang Yinzhou and Zhao Xiuan nodded slightly. Corrupt officials had existed since ancient times, and there was no end to them. Even though the Qi Kingdom was powerful, there were many corrupt officials regardless of whether it was the central government or the officials of the various regions. If they were to carry out a drastic reform, it would definitely implicate countless people. It was unknown how many people would lose their lives. This would cause the people to panic and the political situation to become unstable. This was not their goal. This method could only be used gently. If it was done too hastily, there would be extremely serious consequences. But the first prince has always been eager for quick success and benefits. This time, he won't let it go easily. Those censors are also stubborn. This time, he left the capital to supervise the various prefectures. With this method, he will be like a tiger that has grown wings. Zhao Xiuan paced in the hall and said slowly, he has always seen Feng Province as a thorn in his side. This time, he has bad intentions. He will definitely start with Feng Province. Your Highness, you must be careful.
Zhao, he rubbed his right thumb and index finger gently. After a while, he turned to look at Yang Yinzhou and said, Yinzhou, what do you think? Yang Yinzhou thought for a while and said, This is a rare opportunity for the first prince. Isn't it the same for us? He raised his head and said again, The first prince has always been eager for success. This time, he will definitely make things difficult for your highness. Feng province has nowhere to hide, and the neighboring prefectures will also be affected. Your highness, why don't you push the boat with the current and thoroughly investigate Feng province? First, you can find the parasites. Second, you can eliminate the people they have planted in Feng province all these years. This way, the two parties can supervise each other. No one can play. If the prince wants to investigate, you can. If the first wants to investigate, you will Feng province and prince. If prince wants, you can only Feng province. The god of wealth, Qian, scratched his head, and the confusion on his face grew. Finally, he couldn't help but ask, Why do we have to ask for the first prince's credit? What good will it do for us? What will happen after we ask for the credit? Zhao Xiuwen said, After we ask for the credit, His Majesty will certainly praise the first prince. Everyone in the court knows that the first prince has a powerful weapon in his hands. He can make all the corrupt officials have nowhere to hide. Maybe the prefectures that have been investigated before will be investigated again. Wherever the first prince goes, the officials will panic, and the people will line the streets to welcome him. The god of wealth Qian looked at Zhao Xiuwen and then at Yang Yinzhou. He secretly swallowed his saliva. Wouldn't this make the first prince offend all the officials of the Qi kingdom? When he looked at the two again, his gaze had changed greatly. It seemed that not letting Duo take the top scholars exam was the right thing to do. He decided that in the future, he must keep his son away from these sinister scholars. Compare with them. What was the deception in the business world? By the way, where did you get this thing? Zhao, he suddenly looked at the god of wealth Qian and asked. The god of wealth Qian was startled and said, I picked it up. In a certain post house in Fengzhou City, a few imperial censors were sitting around a table. They had been staring at a piece of paper for almost half an hour. Do you understand it? The young man in luxurious clothes asked as he walked in with his hands behind his back. One of the censors lowered his head and said, Your Highness, the things recorded on this piece of paper are messy and unorganized. I really can't understand it. The young man in luxurious clothes frowned and asked, No one understands it? All of these censors were knowledgeable and talented, but they couldn't even compare to one of Zhao Yi's subordinates. This made him slightly angry. He thought for a moment and said, Go and find out who the fat man in King Feng's mansion is. The god of wealth Qian walked out of King Feng's mansion with a gloomy face. The treasure that he wanted to present to the third prince had been taken away halfway. He was naturally depressed. However, this person who came out of nowhere was someone that even the third prince could not afford to offend. He could only swallow his anger. Are you the god of wealth Qian? When he was about to reach the gate of the Qian mansion, two people suddenly flashed out from the side. The god of wealth Qian was startled. Seeing the cold faces of the two people, he looked at them in confusion and said, Who are you? Why are you looking for my brother? The two people were stunned and asked, The god of wealth Qian is your brother? Yes. The god of wealth Qian nodded and asked, Why are you looking for my brother? I'll go in and help you call him out. After that, he walked toward the gate of the mansion. He had just taken 2 steps when another figure walked out from the side. He could clearly see that this person was the one who had been following the first prince. The person looked at him and said lightly, The first prince wants to see you. Come with me. The god of wealth Qian's expression changed and said, Why is the first prince looking for me? The person waved his hand. You'll know when you get there. Are you the god of wealth Qian? The well-dressed young man looked at the fat man in front of him and asked with a smile. The god of wealth Qian immediately bowed and said, I don't deserve to be called the god of wealth Qian Duo. Greetings, your highness. I wonder why you summoned me here. The first prince picked up the piece of paper and said, Did you really create such a wonderful method? The god of wealth Qian looked up and said, It's just some petty cleverness.
It's not elegant. Your Highness, you flatter me. You don't have to be modest. It's not petty cleverness. The first prince smiled and said, I was worried about how to clean up the country's vermin. This method is of great use to our Qi kingdom. You should take the lead. When I return to the capital, I will ask for your merit in front of the emperor. The god of wealth, Qian, was stunned, and then his face turned pale. He immediately said, Your Highness, please don't. It's my honor to be able to solve your Highness's worries. I can't take credit for it. Otherwise, I'm afraid that I won't be able to sleep at night because of fear. If all the corrupt officials knew that this thing was made by him, they would indeed not be able to sleep peacefully in the future. The god of wealth, Qian, said sincerely, All this is the credit of your Highness. I'm very satisfied to be able to do something for your Highness in silence behind your back. The first prince, Zhao Zheng, looked at him, nodded with satisfaction, and said, You are a smart man who knows how to adapt to circumstances. He had thought that it would take more effort to persuade him to switch to him. He didn't expect that the god of wealth, Qian, was so sensible. Zhao Zheng was very comforted. I was ordered to supervise all the states and prefectures, and it takes time and effort to check the accounts. This time, you have helped I a lot. You can rest assured that I will not treat anyone who has made great contributions unfairly. As long as you do your best to do things for I, you will enjoy endless glory and wealth in the future. The god of wealth, Qian's face was full of fear and trepidation. He bowed and said, Thank you, your Highness. Zhao Zheng nodded, handed him the piece of paper, and said, Go and tell them in detail how to use this method. Yes, sir. The god of wealth, Qian, nodded, picked up the piece of paper, and walked over. At the gate of King Feng's mansion, Yang Yinzhou and Zhao Xuan walked out. When they walked down the steps, Zhao Xuan suddenly turned his head and asked, Yinzhou, do you think the god of wealth Qian will make any mistakes? Yang Yinzhou shook his head and said, Don't underestimate that old fox. Chapter 689. This is actually very simple. As long as you remember that there is an input and an output, the cumbersome accounts will become simple. You can save a lot of time and reduce the possibility of miscalculation. Fortune god Qian explained very seriously and in great detail. He talked incessantly. His saliva sprayed on the face of an imperial censor, but the censor didn't bother to wipe it off for fear of missing any important steps. Although they were still full of contempt and contempt for the merchants, the first prince attached great importance to this matter, so they naturally had to pay attention to it. Your Highness, I will leave first. After half an hour, Fortune god Qian cupped his hands and bowed to Zhao Zheng. Zhao Zheng nodded and said, Thank you for your hard work. You can leave now. Don't worry, I will treat you well in the future. After Fortune god Qian left, an imperial censor came forward and bowed. Congratulations, Your Highness. With this wonderful method, you will definitely make some achievements to satisfy His Majesty and the court officials. God is helping me. Zhao Zheng smiled and said, You should familiarize yourselves with each other first. Tomorrow, we will start from Fengzhou. Everyone's faces showed joy. Before they came to Fengzhou, they had some plans. Now that they had such a wonderful method, it was like God was helping them. It would be much easier and more convenient to do things. They would make great achievements in Fengzhou. Not only could the first prince shake the third prince's layout and arrangement in Fengzhou, but they could also get enough political achievements. It was really killing two birds with one stone. Bah! Fortune god Qian walked more than 10 steps out of the courier house. The panic on his face disappeared. He spat to the side and whispered, Do you think it is so easy to take advantage of me? In and somewhere in Fengzhou, 15 people stood in 2 rows in a room. They cupped their hands and said, Greetings, Chief. The people that Lu Meng arranged to sell color glaze were divided into groups of 15. 5 of them were in the open and disguised as foreign merchants. The other 10 were in the dark and belonged to 2 groups of inspection teams. The 3 groups supervised each other and restrained each other to ensure that there would be no embezzlement or escape with the treasures. The gold and jade pavilion of the Jing Kingdom was the main target of the Lu Meng. Later, for the sake of safety, they would go to further places, such as the Qi Kingdom, the Zhao Kingdom, and so on. It seemed to be a coincidence that they met them here, but it was inevitable. A middle-aged man said in surprise, "On our way here, we also got the news from the brothel. We only heard that the young master and the chief last appeared in Shuzhou. I didn't expect to meet them here." Li looked at him and asked, "Are there only 15 of you who have come to the Qi Kingdom? For now, we are the only team." The middle-aged man nodded and said, "Young master, alliance master, should we go back immediately?" Li glanced at Mississippi Lu and said, "There's no hurry. The most important thing now is to send the news back to the capital. We need someone to go back first. We'll set off immediately." To some extent, this place was safer than Shuzhou. After all, Fengzhou was too far from the capital. What's more, they had to pass through Shuzhou. If there were only 15 people, there was no guarantee that nothing would go wrong. A month ago, the news from Shuzhou had been sent back. Rui and the others should have received the news by now and made some arrangements. What they needed to do now was to get in touch with them first and then wait. At most, in a month, Mississippi Lu's body would be much better, and there would be no more worries in Shuzhou. I'll write a letter first and ask someone to send it all the way back. Get in touch with the brothel in Shuzhou and pay attention to the news from Shuzhou. Don't forget the important thing. After you go out of this door, you are foreign merchants. Li gave a few instructions. After a while, a man came out of the inn with a horse. After leaving the city, he immediately jumped on the horse and galloped in a certain direction. In the capital of the Jing Kingdom, the little maid was sitting in the yard. When she saw a figure coming out of the house, she hurriedly stood up and ran over to say, "Miss, be careful. I'll help you." Rui shook her head and said, "It hasn't been long. Miss is not so delicate." The little maid shook her head and said, "The old granny said that you have to take care of yourself now. What do you want to eat today? I'll make it." Rui touched her head and said, "You've been busy these days. Take a rest. Just tell the kitchen to do these things." "No." The little maid shook her head like a rattle drum and said, "Miss, the baby will grow better if you eat better." She leaned her head over and listened carefully. She asked, "When can I see the baby?" Rui thought for a moment and said, "Probably in the winter of this year." "In the winter, the son-in-law should be able to come back," the little maid murmured as she looked up at the sky outside the courtyard walls. At a certain moment, the door to the courtyard was suddenly pushed open. Old Fong ran in with a happy expression. He panted heavily and said, "Young miss, there's news about the son-in-law and the second young miss." Fong bent over and panted as he said, "The brothel." The news came from the brothel. "The son-in-law and the second miss are in Shuzhou. Shuzhou." The little maid clenched her fists and murmured. A smile appeared on Rui's face. She said, "Send someone to the Li family first and tell the old granny this news. Send someone to the crown prince's residence as well, and a few of the general's residences." And she lowered her head and said softly, "Willow Lane." Go personally. The entire Li family was thoroughly stirred up because of a certain piece of news. Fast horses galloped out of the mansion, turning into wisps of smoke and dust as they scattered in all directions. In the Li manor, the old granny knelt in the temple with tears in her old eyes. In the Xuan manor, several old generals drank to their heart's content and started fighting as they drank. What did you just say? Say it again. In the crown prince's residence, after listening to a guard's report, Li Xian, who was drawing some kind of diagram, suddenly stood up. Only a few words echoed in the room. Willow Lane was as peaceful as ever. In the deepest part of the lane, in a quiet courtyard, Zheng Zumo put down her brush and said, "Let them make a set like this first. If there's anything that needs to be changed, I will let them know." "Yes, young lady. I will go now." A woman behind her nodded, picked up the drawing, and left the courtyard. Zheng Zumo sat back in her seat and rubbed her sore shoulders. The next moment, there was a gentle force on both sides of her shoulders. She stood up, held Wan Ruoqing's hand, and said, "Didn't the doctor say that you should rest at home these days?" What if you catch a cold again? Go in quickly. Wanruwatching shook her head and said, It's so stuffy staying in the room all the time. I have to come out for some fresh air. Then you sit here. I will go in and get some clothes for you. Zheng Zumo pressed her down and turned to walk into the room. There was a knock on the door. Xiao Chui, who was washing clothes in the corridor, quickly ran over and opened the door. She asked with a smile, Uncle Fong, you haven't been here for a long time. What's the matter? Lao Fong walked in and walked up to Wanruwatching. He said, There's news about the son-in-law. He should be in Shuzhou now. We'll send someone to pick him up right away. Wanruwatching slowly stood up. At the door of the room, the thin shirt in Zheng Zumo's hands gently fell to the ground. At the palace gate, the guards on the palace wall looked down and shouted, Who goes there? Below the palace walls, a person nimbly dismounted from his horse and tossed a waste token onto the wall. Urgent report from the Intelligence Bureau. I must see His Majesty immediately. Chapter 690. After verifying the identity of the Secret Intelligence Division, a basket was slowly lowered from the palace wall, and the person from the Secret Intelligence Division was hoisted up. Soon, several figures rushed into the palace. As they hurried away, a eunuch turned around and asked the man, His Majesty is already asleep. Are you sure this matter is urgent enough to wake His Majesty up now? The spy nodded and said, His Majesty has ordered that as soon as there is news of County Marquis Li, we must report it immediately. County Marquis Li? The eunuch glanced at him and said, Wait here for a moment. I'll go and report. After that, he quickly walked to a palace in front of him. Before he reached the front of the palace, a voice came from the side. Why disturb His Majesty so late at night? The eunuch turned around and hurriedly bowed and said, Greetings, Chief Steward Chong. Chong said lightly, His Majesty has just fallen asleep. If it's not urgent, we'll talk about it tomorrow. The eunuch respectfully said, Chief Steward Chong, the spy office has urgent news of County Marquis Li. Chongda raised his eyebrows and said, Let him wait here. After that, he quickly took 2 steps and pushed the door into the main hall. Not long after, lights were lit in the palace. Emperor Jing put on a robe and paced in the hall. He read the letter in his hand several times and said, The spy office will send 20 high priests to bring him back to me unharmed. After arriving in Shuzhou, take over the soldiers of Shuzhou first so that it's easier to act. If there's any disobedience, you can kill him first and report later. Yes, Your Majesty. Chongda bowed and said. Before the sky was bright, a group of people hurried out of the city with a token and went all the way to the west. At the city gate, Chongda reined in his horse and said to a middle-aged Taoist in front of him, surnamed Yuan, This time, I'll leave County Marquis Li to you. His Majesty has an order to bring him back unharmed. I'll try my best. The middle-aged Taoist raised his hand to salute, turned his head and said slowly, Let's go. As Li Xian rode on his horse, he asked doubtfully, Just a few of them? Can they do it? Chongda turned his horse around and explained, There's only one Grandmaster. The rest of them are all below the level of Grandmaster, and there are few who can match them. It's impossible to attack a city, but it's easy to take the head of the enemy's general amidst an army of tens of thousands. Besides, they have His Majesty's imperial edict in their hands. Wherever they go, they can temporarily mobilize 500 soldiers. It's already very safe. It's been 2 months. Li Xian nodded, reined in his horse, and returned to the city. 50 li outside the capital, in a huge plaza, Lu Luo stood on the platform and looked down at the crowd of nearly 100 people and loudly said, The journey to the Shu province is long. Everyone, please be careful. Yang Liuqing waved his hand and said, Let's go. Watching the figures of the crowd gradually disappear, Lu Luo walked down from the high platform and said to the others, Go back to your work. This time, almost all the elites of the Lu League had come. Among the 100 people, any one of them would have a resounding name on the hero ranking. This kind of power was enough to sweep away any force in the martial arts world. The Li family. Miss, let me go with them. Lao Fong, who was carrying a bag on his back, said with determination. Rui looked at him and said, "They've sent over 100 masters this time. Nothing will go wrong." Fong shook his head and said, "I lost a son-in-law. If I can't find him myself, I won't be able to rest in peace for the rest of my life." A woman walked over and said, "Eldest miss, just let him go." Rui looked at Aunt Fong. After a moment, she nodded slightly. A hint of excitement appeared on Fong's face. He said, "Don't worry, Mississippi. Once we find a son-in-law and second miss, we'll be back immediately." With that, he tightened the bag on his back, hugged his wife tightly, and dashed out without looking back. The woman blushed. This dead man. Life was always full of surprises. There were many unexpected things. No one knew what was going to happen in the next second. Maybe it would be a hard slap to wake you up and teach you to be a good person. Maybe it would be a big gift from the sky, the kind with a bow on the outside to tell you how beautiful the world was. After being unlucky for so long, his luck had finally changed. It was time to celebrate. He wrapped the freshly made milk candy with glutinous rice paper. When it cooled down, it could be eaten. With this thing, Mississippi Lou would be much more straightforward when she took the medicine. She didn't have to force herself every time. After a long time, the way she looked at him made Li feel a little guilty. Good things should be shared with everyone. He put some in the box that had just been dried and planned to give them to Lin Yong and Lin Wanru. After Lin Yong threw a piece into his mouth, his eyes lit up. He asked, "Li brothers, what is this? It's so delicious. Give me a few more. These are all for you." Li poured a small half of the contents of the box for him and said, "As for the rest, when your miss comes over, let her have a taste." Lin Yong waved his hand and said, "I have to look after the shop in the front. Miss is in the back. You can go by yourself." He had been familiar with Li for a long time, so he gradually spoke more casually. All right. You look after the shop. I'll go by myself." Li waved his hand and walked to the room in the backyard. In the yard, he saw Lin Wanru writing something at the table. Li knocked on the door and walked in. He put the box on the table and said, "I just made it. Try it." Lin Wanru looked at him, picked up a piece, and put it in her mouth. She nodded slightly and asked, "Is Miss Lu feeling better?" "Much better." Li nodded. He saw the words "by family" and "Su family" written on the paper in front of her. There seemed to be some numbers behind them. He thought of something and asked, "What's wrong? Haven't you solved the problem of the raw materials?" Lin Wanru shook her head and said, "We haven't reached an agreement with the Su family and the Ma family. Raising the price by 10% should be their first step. If we agree, I'm afraid they will immediately ask for more. As for the Bai family, I'm just like them." Li looked at her and asked, "What are you going to do?" Lin Wanru said, "Find someone else to cooperate with. If Fong Lin Park doesn't pick up the goods from the three families, the jewelry shops in Feng Province won't be able to handle the goods from the three families. When that time comes, they will be anxious." Li thought about it and said, "Speaking of this, I know a few friends who might be able to solve your problem." Lin Wanru looked up at him and asked doubtfully, "You have friends in Feng Province?" "I just met them." Li looked at her and said, "I should have mentioned to you before that there is a country called Great Britain that is rich in colored glaze and has no shortage of jewelry. I happened to meet a few foreign businessmen from Great Britain yesterday. I'll help you ask if they have the goods and if they are willing to cooperate with you." Lin Wanru stood up and looked at him. "Then I'll have to trouble you." Li waved his hand and said, "We're on the same side. It's what I should do." Lin Yong leaned against the door of the shop and took out a milky white lump from the box. He threw it into the air and caught it with his mouth. His eyes wandered, and he wondered what the Queen of Great Britain's 3 palaces and 6 courtyards looked like. On the street, an extremely slovenly old man with worn-out clothes and messy hair took out a small porcelain bottle from his bosom. He poured out a pill from it and threw it into his mouth. His brows instantly furrowed. He hurriedly took out a cloth bag from his arms. When he opened it, he saw that it was empty. His face changed involuntarily. The sloppy old man sighed, and a look of frustration and confusion appeared on his face. He had lost the person and the candy. Although the antidote could last for a long time, if he couldn't find the person, he would still end up the same. It was just a matter of time.
Should he continue to search like a headless fly in the Qi Kingdom, or should he return to the Jing Kingdom and wait for news? This was a difficult question. Suddenly, as if he smelled something, he sniffed and quickly turned his head to look in a certain direction. A man was leaning against the door of the shop. He was bored to death, throwing something white into the air and catching it with his mouth. Lin Yong was still absent-mindedly repeating the action just now. However, when he habitually closed his mouth this time, he found that the sweet thing did not fall into his mouth. He actually wasted one. He shook his head in disappointment and threw another one. Still nothing. When he threw the third candy, Lin Yong finally realized something. He lowered his head and saw an extremely sloppy old man standing in front of him. The old man was currently putting a candy into his mouth. Chapter 691. An intoxicated expression appeared on the sloppy old man's face. How could he have such an expression after eating candy? Lin Yong waved his hand angrily and scolded. Where did this beggar come from? Get lost. He had thought that his accuracy had deteriorated due to overwork. He did not expect this old beggar to rob him. He had never seen such a bold beggar. Lin Yong rolled up his sleeves. Fonglin Garden had been attracting beggars for the past 2 days. Many customers had been scared away, and there had been a lot of business. If this old man did not know what was good for him, he was prepared to take some tough measures. The old man nodded in satisfaction with the candy in his mouth. He did not care about what Lin Yong had done. He pointed at the box in his hand and asked, "Where can I buy this?" This kind of milk candy was only sold in the capital of the Jing Kingdom. This was the first time he had seen it anywhere else since he left the capital. What's there to sell? Let's go. Lin Yong waved his hand. He did not want to argue with him about what had happened just now. He thought that there was no point in arguing with a beggar. Instead, it would lower his status. Let's go. You. Seeing that the old man was unmoved, Lin Yong had just finished speaking when the sloppy old man raised his head and glanced at him. It was this look that made Lin Yong shiver involuntarily. It was as if a basin of ice water had been poured over his head. He felt cold from head to toe. He could not say what he wanted to say no matter what. The old man looked at him and asked again, "Where can I buy this?" Lin Yong said subconsciously, "No, I don't sell it." The sloppy old man frowned. At this moment, a figure walked out of the shop. Li looked at Lin Yong and said, "If you have finished eating, you can go over there and get more. I made a lot this time. 2 people can't finish it." The sloppy old man raised his head and looked at the familiar yet strange young man who had walked out of the shop. His nose suddenly felt a little sour. Suffering from the strange poison, trekking over mountains and rivers, sprinting for thousands of miles, eating and sleeping in the open, experiencing countless hardships to arrive here step by step, and all these hardships had finally vanished into thin air at this moment. He looked at the beggar with sparkling eyes and sighed. Everyone had their own way of living. There were high and mighty emperors, and there were beggars who lived at the bottom of society. Everyone had different worries. For the former, they might think about how to conquer cities and stabilize the country. But for the latter, they would be moved to tears just by eating a piece of candy. Being able to fill their stomachs and survive was probably their only pursuit. He took out a piece of silver and handed it over, saying, "Take it, go eat something." The old man combed his messy hair to the side and said in a trembling voice, "It's me." Lin Yong was stunned. He looked at Li Yi and then at the old beggar with a puzzled expression. Li's hand was in midair. At that moment, he felt like he had won the lottery. "I took this from home. It's Uncle Lin's clothes. Where at first?" Lin Yong took a piece of clothes and said, "Li brothers, you have such an old servant in your family. Why haven't I heard you mention it before?" Li Yi explained, "At that time, we met mountain bandits and accidentally got separated. It's really fate that we can meet again here. It's not easy." Lin Yong put down the clothes and looked at the sloppy old man who was washing his face. He turned back and whispered, "I'll get something for him to eat." Just now, his eyes were green with hunger. I'm scared just looking at him. Of course, a guru was terrifying. In such an era, he could even be called a nuclear weapon.
His martial art cultivation had already reached the peak. He could use his own momentum to make ordinary people or even ordinary masters directly collapse. Killing with a glance was nothing. The sloppy old man changed into a set of clean clothes and swept his gaze across the courtyard. The two people he was looking for were both there. He drank a mouthful of wine and casually threw a piece of candy into his mouth. He only felt that the heavy burden on his shoulders had been lifted in an instant. The task was completed. There was candy and wine. What more could he ask for in life? Li sat beside him and looked at him. He asked, "Why are you here?" "Someone asked me to come here. He asked me to bring you back unscathed." The sloppy old man looked at him and said, "You know, we people in Jianghu pay most attention to the word righteousness. Since I promised him, I must do it." Li thought for a moment and asked again, "What's the situation in Shuzhou now?" "They still don't know that you have come to the Qi Kingdom. They have been searching for you. I heard that the king of Shu has even offered a reward of 10,000 taels of silver, vowing to find you." The old man looked at him and asked, "Do you have a good relationship with the king of Shu?" Li waved his hand and said, "Just a little," the old man said. "Then let go back immediately. When we reach Shuzhou, we don't have to worry about the power of the Taoist nun." "Ahem." Li coughed twice and said, "Don't worry. You have fought with the Taoist nun. Aren't you injured? Stay here and recuperate for a while. We will leave after resting for a while." The king of Shu was an idiot. If he had used this kind of perseverance on other things, he would have become the crown prince long ago. He would not have been sent to a remote place like Shuzhou. He weighed the pros and cons carefully. Although there was one more injured grandmaster, a grandmaster could not kill thousands of people. Given his friendship with the king of Shu, it would still be difficult for him to pass through Shuzhou and return safely. "My injury is not a problem. As long as I don't meet a grandmaster, I will be fine." The sloppy old man clapped his hands and said, "You should pack up first and set off early to avoid more trouble." Li stood up, looked at him, and said, "You should recuperate first. What if your injury worsens? Your health is the most important. I will find a place for you in the inn next door. You can stay there first. This matter is settled." One cannot be too selfish. It was not easy for the old man to travel thousands of miles. He had just had a chance to rest, but he had to torture him again. If he really did this, was he still human? The sloppy old man watched him walk out of the yard. The expression on his old face was a little stunned. After a while, it became a little complicated. In Fongling Garden, Lin Wanru put down her pen and looked at Li and asked, "How do you plan to settle that old man?" Li said, "Let him stay in the inn next door." It was not easy for the old man to come all the way here. "If there is any difficulty, you could tell me." Lin Wanru nodded, looked up at him, and asked, "The foreign merchants, I've already negotiated with them." Li smiled and said, "They are also in urgent need of money. They have a lot of jewelry, which was brought from the Jin Kingdom. I can provide them to you directly. The price is negotiable." Lin Wanru thought for a while and said, "If the jewelry has been shaped, I'm afraid the price will not be low." Li waved his hand and said, "You don't have to worry about that. I heard from these foreign merchants that their former shopkeeper owed hundreds of thousands of taels of silver for eating, drinking, whoring, and gambling. He ran away with his sister-in-law and didn't even pay them their wages. They were forced to take these jewels and sell them cheaply. The original price of 1,000 taels of silver can now be bought for 300 taels of silver. The price won't be too high, and even your labor fees will be saved." "Really?" Lin Wanru raised her head, and her beautiful eyes lit up. "Really?" He nodded. "If those goods were converted into taels of silver, it would be inconvenient to carry them. Silver notes could only be exchanged in the Qi Kingdom. If they want to go back, these things would be a burden." So he simply did her a favor. Chapter 692. "If that's true, that would be great." Lin Wanru shook her head and said, "It's just that he actually eloped with his wife's sister. That shopkeeper's character is too despicable. It's best not to make wild guesses if you don't know the truth." He shook his head and said, "Maybe he had no other choice, or maybe he was just wronged or misunderstood. Lin Wanru waved her hand and said, "Heartless men are not worth discussing. Let's talk about the cooperation with those foreign merchants." "No. How is he heartless? I wonder how much goods they have. What if he was also forced? Is it finished goods or raw materials?" The injustice of the owner of the glass shop could not be cleared. Li Yi sighed and explained, "They have a lot of goods. The Lin family definitely can't eat them all, and they won't sell all of them to you. The goods are all finished goods. Great Britain is rich in glass, but it lacks other gems and jade. This time, they're using glass to exchange for these things and plan to sell them back home." Lin Wanru was puzzled and asked, "If that's the case, why did they cede them to us?" Li Yi continued to explain, "Great Britain is just a small country. Who would they sell so many gems and jade to? They also want to sell some here first so that they can reduce the pressure when they go back. If they have too many goods and can't sell them, wouldn't that be a loss?" Lin Wanru thought about it and looked at him. She reminded him, "There's no such thing as a free lunch in this world. I still feel that there's something fishy about this. You have to be careful and don't be fooled by them. Why is this girl so insensitive?" Li felt a headache coming on and said, "How about this? Those people are still in the city. If there's anything, you can talk to them personally when you have time." Although he wanted to help the Lin family get through this hurdle, some things couldn't be said. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Those foreign merchants are staying in the inn next door. I'll ask them to look for you later." As he walked out of Fragrant Forest Park, Li Yi suddenly realized something. That night, Lin Wanru accidentally left the paper with the debit and credit bookkeeping method in the Qian family. It was picked up by the god of wealth, but he didn't know whether he understood it or not. Thinking about it carefully, it was just a simple example. The possibility of an ordinary person understanding it was not high. Even if they were really enlightened, it would not cause much of a stir when used for a small-scale audit. What I'm afraid of is that not only does he understand it, but he also becomes patriotic and wants to eliminate the traitors for the country. He wants to return the world to a bright and clear sky. Then, when he presents this method, he happens to meet an upright official who wants to make a great contribution and use it to carry out the anti-corruption work. It's like fighting flies and tigers at the same time. If that was the case, there would be a good show to watch. Although this possibility was indeed pitifully small, if any part of it was missing, it would not have the desired effect. However, there was no show to watch. He wasn't so bored that he had to harm the third prince, Zhao Yi. After all, the third prince had treated him well. If it wasn't for the jade pendant, Mississippi Lou's body would not have recovered so well. If one did too many ungrateful things, there would be retribution. What a pity! Li Yi sighed and walked out of the door of the shop. Today was an extremely ordinary day for the people of Feng Province. Most people were busy making a living as usual. However, some officials in the city could not help but be on tenterhooks. This time, the eldest prince personally led many imperial censors and 500 personal guards to inspect the area on behalf of the emperor. Every time they arrived at a place, they would stay for a few days to listen to the public opinion and inspect the local officials. They had the power to dismiss officials below the 6th rank. If the officials above the 6th rank had committed a serious crime, they could be detained and brought back to the capital. Feng Province was the third prince's fief. Everyone knew about the relationship between the eldest prince and the third prince. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The eldest prince would certainly not let it go easily. The officials of Feng Province had to pray for their own good fortune. Have you all figured out the method? The eldest prince, Zhao Zheng, looked at the imperial censors in a temporary guest house in Feng Province and asked. The imperial censors replied in unison, "Your Highness, we have figured it out." Zhao Zheng nodded and said, "This time, we have been ordered by His Majesty to supervise the prefectures. We must act in accordance with the law. We must not disappoint His Majesty and the people of Deqi. Go!" Everyone complied. As they walked out of the guest house, they saw more than 10 figures in front of them. An official who was walking in front of them cupped his fists and said, "I have been ordered by the third prince to assist you. Sirs, please." The imperial censors looked at each other and did not know what to do. Suddenly,
The eldest prince's voice was heard from behind. Speaking of which, the third Imperial Brothers people are indeed more familiar with Foam Province. Zhao Zheng walked out and said with a smile, "Remember to thank the third Imperial Brother for me when you go back." After everyone had left, an accompanying official came forward and said with a frown, "Your Highness, the third Imperial Brother clearly does not trust you." Zhao Zheng waved his hand and said, "Since he is worried, let those people follow. I'm only acting on orders. It is good that the officials of Foam Province are safe. If something happens, I believe the third Imperial Brother will not protect them. Otherwise," he smiled and waved his hand, saying, "Let's go and have a look. I'm also very curious about what is so special about Foam Province." In the central pavilion in the back garden of King Feng's mansion, the middle-aged man held a black chess piece in his hand. After thinking for a long time, he placed it on the chessboard. He looked up at the young man opposite him and said, "They should have left by now." Zhao, he held the white chess piece and quickly placed it on a spot. He casually asked, "Who in the capital will be unhappy this time?" The middle-aged man picked up another black chess piece, but was not in a hurry to place it down. After thinking for a while, he said, "The accounts of the mansion have already been thoroughly checked overnight. There are indeed some loopholes in some places. The one in question is the nephew of the Minister of Revenue." Zhao, he sighed softly and said, "If I remember correctly, Minister Zhou of the Ministry of Revenue has no children. He only has this nephew. When he came to Foam Province, he asked how to take care of him. I plan to transfer him back to the capital in the future. This time, I am afraid that I will have to break my promise. Your Highness, there is no need to be like this." The middle-aged man placed a chess piece down and said, "He can only blame himself for being too greedy. The amount of money he has embezzled is too large. Presumably, the supervising imperial censors will not let it go so easily. Speaking of which, it is my fault as the provincial governor. Tomorrow, I will send a memorial to the capital. If it wasn't for the great prince, I'm afraid there would have been even more serious losses. I must put in a good word for the great prince in front of his majesty." Zhao, he placed a white chess piece down and said with a smile, "I'm afraid the Yamen is in a mess right now. You, the provincial governor, are playing chess with I? You should go back quickly. How about we end this game here?" The middle-aged man looked at the chessboard and shook his head. He smiled bitterly and said, "Thank you, Your Highness. If we continue, I will immediately lose." He stood up, cupped his hands in a salute, and said, "I will take my leave." At the same time that the middle-aged man walked out of the mansion, an imperial censor came out of the Foam Prefecture Yamen. With a serious expression, he read out a few names and waved his hand at the soldiers behind him. "Take them all away." A few of the officials who were standing in a row immediately broke out in a cold sweat. Their faces were ashen. One of them could not help but be frightened and collapsed on the ground. The rest of the people looked at each other and could not hide the shock on their faces. The imperial censors sent by the imperial court this time were completely different from before. They were able to find these people so easily and decisively without any sloppiness. On the second day of his arrival in Foam Province, the great prince had already expressed his attitude. Seeing their colleagues, who had been joking with them in the morning, being taken away at this moment, and some of them might not even be able to see them again in the future, everyone had different expressions on their faces. Their hearts were extremely complicated. His Excellency has been taken away. Quickly, send a letter to the capital. It is said that the first prince has a wonderful method that can make all the corrupt officials have nowhere to hide. We need to be vigilant about this. We have to report this to His Excellency quickly. This is extremely urgent. Immediately send this letter to the capital and remind them to be more careful." He walked out of the courtyard and saw a large group of soldiers escorting a few people on the street. He could not help but sigh and said softly, "The security in Foam Prefecture is really not good." Chapter 693. How's the talk with them? Li Yi stood at the door of the room and asked Lin Wanru.
It's been settled. Lin Wanru nodded and looked at him. They'll deliver the goods today. They said that if they come to the Qi Kingdom again in the future, they'll also look for the Lin family to cooperate. There was still a trace of doubt on her face. The Lin family needed to pay a very small price to cooperate with these foreign merchants. It was almost a business that was profitable without any loss. However, doing business had to bear a certain amount of risk. How could there be a thing that was profitable without any loss? After the initial surprise, she quickly calmed down and began to think about some deeper things. These foreign merchants could indeed solve the difficulties of the Lin family. If they could achieve a long-term cooperation with them, they could completely get rid of the Bai family, the Ma family, and the Su family. And the low price they offered would make the Lin family have a huge profit. Everything was beneficial to the Lin family. However, would there really be people in this world who would be so selfless to give money to her for nothing? The more it was like this, the more she felt that those people should have some ulterior motives. The greater the profit they offered, the greater the conspiracy, which made her feel more uneasy. However, after discussing with those foreign merchants just now, she began to feel uncertain about this idea in her heart. All the agreements about the cooperation were very clear. After reading them word by word, she didn't find anything wrong. These foreign merchants might really be short of money, so they sold those goods at a low price. In this case, the owner of the glass shop who eloped with his wife and sister had unknowingly helped the Lin family a lot. Thinking of this, the feeling of disgust in her heart actually weakened a little. As if thinking of something, Lin Wanru suddenly looked up at him and asked, "Although there aren't many jewelry shops in Fengzhou City, there are still a few. Why did they choose the Lin family? These goods aren't mine. How would I know why they chose the Lin family? But it could also be because of those foreign merchants. Business is business. Miss Lin, you must be careful. Remember to beware of those people." Li Yi glanced at her and said, "The security in Fengzhou City hasn't been very good recently. I've seen soldiers arresting people outside these 2 days. In short, Miss Lin, please be careful. Those are imperial censors from the capital who are investigating corrupt officials. They've caused quite a ruckus in the last few days. I heard that they have some sort of wondrous technique that allows them to investigate in an extremely short amount of time." Lin Wanru couldn't continue. She glanced at Li Yi, and a strange expression suddenly appeared on her face. Li Yi was stunned for a moment. Then he nodded and said, "It's good to investigate corrupt officials. These corrupt officials only know how to plunder the people's wealth and not let them live a good life. This should have been investigated long ago." Lin Wanru looked at him in a daze and whispered, "Is it that night?" Hey, what night? Girls should pay attention to what you say. It's not good to be heard by others. I don't know what you're talking about." Li Yi waved his hand and turned to leave. "I have to go back to cook. See you later, Miss Lin." Lin Wanru stood in the same place and flipped through the account books on the table. Her face was filled with doubt, confusion, and all kinds of mixed emotions. When she finally raised her head and looked out of the door, there was no one there. No one could escape. What was to come would come. Maybe all of this was destined. Li Yi hummed a lively tune as he walked into the courtyard. Out of habit, he raised his head to take a look. The window of one of the rooms on the upper floor of the inn was open. That was where the old man, surnamed Su, was temporarily staying. Grandmaster Li Yi had seen several of them, including Rui, Old Man Chong, Taoist Nun, second granduncle, and the monster Su upstairs. He always thought that grandmasters should have a sage-like appearance. They could destroy strong enemies with a wave of their hands, and then they could leave with a wave of their sleeves, leaving nothing behind. It was the first time he saw a grandmaster who ate white rabbit creamy candies as if they were rice. Mississippi Lu often did some activities in the courtyard. She was no different from a normal person now, and a dozen normal people were definitely no match for her. Judging from the fact that he was still standing here, it should be some time before Mississippi Lu fully recovered. Li Yi walked into the kitchen and brought out the war medicine. He walked to the stone table, looked back at Mississippi Lu, and said, "Put down the sword first. It's time to drink the medicine." "Drink. A toast to shopkeeper Su." "Ha ha. Young Master Bai, you're too kind." In a private room of a restaurant in the city, Bayou raised his wine cup and looked at the two men opposite him. He smiled and said, "Shopkeeper Ma, Shopkeeper Sue, let me give you a toast. Many thanks to the two of you, for this matter." "You're welcome, you're welcome." A man with a short beard smiled and said, "Our three families are united, and that's how we got to where we are today. We should help each other for such a small matter." The other man next to him said, "Moreover, if Nephew Bai can take down the Lin family, it'll be a good thing for us." The man with the short beard thought about it and said, "I'm afraid that the Lin family will fight us to the death. That'll be troublesome. The Lin family shouldn't be so irrational. Apart from the three of us, they have no other source of goods in the entire Phone province. If they really fight us to the death, their losses will be even greater." That's not necessarily the case. Miss Lin is now in power. Everything related to the Lin family's business is decided by her. You know her temper, and she has many tricks up her sleeve. It's not impossible for her to fight us to the death. Bayou cleared his throat and said, "Don't worry, since I'm the one who suggested this, I won't let you suffer. Without the goods, the Lin family won't be able to hold on for long. We just need to wait patiently. Even if something happens, the Bai family will be able to take all the goods from both families." "That's good." The two men smiled and nodded. They raised their wine glasses and said, "Let's drink, let's drink." The door was suddenly pushed open from the outside. A man dressed like a shop assistant walked in and whispered a few words in the short-bearded man's ear. The short-bearded man put down his wine glass and asked, "Really?" The shop assistant nodded vigorously. "He's waiting in the shop right now." The short-bearded man's eyes flashed a few times. He stood up and cupped his hands toward Bayou and the other man. He smiled and said, "Brother Sue, Nephew Bai, something happened in the shop. I'll be taking my leave first." "It's fine." Bayou nodded. Seeing him leave in a hurry, the man surnamed Sue and Bayou looked at each other. Their eyes were filled with doubt. The man surnamed Sue glanced at him and asked, "Shall we go take a look?" "Let's go." Bayou nodded. The Ma family made a living by selling jade materials. They had a few shops, and although they weren't considered a big business, they could still be considered a wealthy family. They had a bit of a reputation in Phone province. At this moment, Shopkeeper Ma hurriedly stepped into the shop. As soon as he entered, he impatiently asked, "Where are the glass materials?" Inside the shop, a few strangely dressed men stood there. One of them was speaking to the shop assistant in a strange manner while gesturing with his hands. On the street, Bayou and the man surnamed Sue were quickly walking over. Chapter 694. The strangely dressed man casually took out a piece of green, transparent, irregular object and said, "These colored glaze materials are all real. You can inspect them and ask someone to process them. It won't take much effort to make a good colored glazeware. If we weren't in urgent need of silver, we would definitely process them ourselves and not sell them to you." The shop assistant looked at him with a puzzled face and asked, "You didn't speak like that just now." The foreign merchant was stunned and asked, "Then how did I speak like that?" Yes, you spoke like that." The shop assistant twitched his mouth and immediately shut his mouth after saying that. He was worried that if he continued talking to him, he would also speak like that in the future. Shopkeeper Ma didn't pay attention to the conversation between the two. All his attention was on the piece of colored glaze in his hand. After a moment, he withdrew his gaze and took a deep breath, asking, "How much is the piece of colored glaze in your hand worth?" The man weighed the colored glaze in his hand and said, 3,000 taels. 3,000 taels? Shopkeeper Ma smiled and said, "If it's a real piece of colored glaze where 3,000 taels isn't expensive, but this is just a raw material. How can it be worth 3,000 taels? You're in this line of business, so you should know that it doesn't cost much to make a piece of colored glazeware." The foreign merchant opened his mouth and paused. He looked at the shop assistant next to him and said, "The important thing is the raw material. 3,000 taels isn't expensive. I'm in the raw material business, so I naturally know the rules of this line of business." Boss Ma smiled and said, It's risky to carve the raw materials into jewelry. How about 2,000 taels of silver? We have a lot of color glaze and wanted to find someone who is worth cooperating with. The man shook his head, took the colored glaze in his hand, and turned to leave. When he walked to the door, he turned back and said, "Since you're not sincere, we'll find someone else." At the door, a middle-aged man stopped him and said with a smile, Wait. Our Sioux family is also in this line of business. 3,000 taels it is. The price is negotiable. Can I have a look at this piece of colored glaze first?" Shopkeeper Ma quickly walked out and happened to see the middle-aged man holding the piece of glass and looking it up and down. His heart sank, and he immediately stepped forward and said, "Brother Sioux, how could you do something like stealing business? Don't you know the rules?" The man looked up at him and said with a smile, "Brother Ma, what are you talking about? This is obviously a business that you don't want to do. Don't tell me you don't want others to do it. What business do you mean I won't do? Aren't I discussing it now?" Shopkeeper Ma walked over with a face full of smiles as he stopped in front of the foreign merchant and said, Come. Brother, I was in the wrong just now. Come in and have a cup of tea. We can talk about it slowly." The man surnamed Sioux said, "All right, I'm thirsty. Let's talk inside." Shopkeeper Ma looked back and said, "What do you mean? Let's talk inside. I'm discussing business with this brother. What are you doing here?" The man surnamed Sioux said with a sullen face, "Brother Ma, this is a bit too much. Can your Ma family handle such a big business?" The young man surnamed By immediately stepped forward to smooth things over. "Shopkeepers, we've been friends for so many years. Let's not hurt each other because of such a small matter. Shopkeeper Sioux, Shopkeeper Ma accepted this business first. Why don't we let them talk first? There must be some rules, right?" After saying that, he looked at the foreign merchant and asked, "You just said that you have a lot of glass? This damn Sioux family and Ma family. We've been working together for so many years. How can they raise the price just like that?" What a despicable person. In the courtyard, Lin Yong was squatting on the ground, snorting as he ate the noodles and complained angrily. Li Yi used a small fan to fan the fire while brewing the medicine for Lady Lu. Merchants only pursue profit. Don't take friendship seriously. Money is their true friend. Don't think that the three of them are in the same boat now. If there is a conflict of interest, they will turn hostile faster than anyone else, said Li casually as he used a small fan to fan the fire while brewing medicine for Lady Lu. Lin Yong interrupted, "My lady is not like that. All right. I know your lady is a good person. Kindness will be rewarded. It's not that she won't repay her kindness, but it's not time yet." He added more firewood to the pot and said, "You don't have to be too angry. No matter what you do, you have to have a bottom line. Otherwise, you'll suffer retribution. Those who cheat others will be cheated. This has been the truth since ancient times. Maybe those families will soon suffer retribution." Lin Yong snorted and finished eating the noodles. He put down the bowl and said gloomily, "Why haven't I seen evil get retribution? Good people don't live long, but scourges last for thousands of years. In this world, evil people live more freely." Li saw that a window of a room in the inn next door was opened. He stood up and handed the fan to Lin Yong. He patted him on the shoulder and said, "Believe me, there will always be retribution. It's just a matter of time. I'll go out for a while. Help me watch the fire for a while." Lin Yong squatted down and fanned the fire for some time. He walked out of the courtyard and walked into the inn next door. He went straight up to the second floor and knocked on a door 3 times. After 3 knocks, the door opened. Inside the room, a man stood up and said, "I've just reached an agreement with those 3 families. Those raw materials will be given to them. It's not convenient for us to use silver notes, so let them directly trade with gold." Unlike other things, colored glass was not only valuable after it was made into colored glasswares. Even if it was just a ball, it was also an auspicious sign and treasure in people's eyes. That thing could be burned in large quantities every day, so there was no time to carve it one by one. It could be casually burned and sold for money. It didn't take time and effort, and it was extremely convenient. The Bai family, the Sioux family, and the Ma family had obviously joined hands this time
to force Lin Wanru to give in. It just so happened that there was no place to sell these things. Previously, they lived in other people's houses, so they would do whatever they could to help. The man smiled and asked tentatively, "Young master, do you think we can get 10 more points this time?" Li looked at them and said with a smile, "Everyone has worked hard these days. When we go back, everyone will get 50 more points." A few people's faces lit up, and they cupped their fists and said, "Thank you, young master." After Li left, one person closed the door, but the joy on their faces still did not fade. A young man's face lit up with anticipation, and he said, 50 points, in addition to the previous points, we can get Senior Liu to teach us martial arts once. I plan to exchange 500 taels of silver to buy a house in the capital and bring my mother back." Another middle-aged man smiled and said, "Xiaowu, what about you?" A young man sitting in the corner smiled and said, "I also plan to buy a house next to yours, and then I'll go back and propose. Xiuxiu has already waited for me for 3 years, but that old guy didn't agree. This time, I'll go back and smash him to death with silver." Haha, you're ambitious. The conversation in the room was limited to this small space. In another part of the city, Baiyu and 2 other middle-aged men were gathered together, also talking in low voices. Baiyu looked at the 2 of them and said, "This is a big business, and only our 3 families can handle it. You 2 should stop fighting. They actually only want gold. Where are we going to get it? Gold is easy. We could just go to the bank and exchange it. The problem is that we don't have that much silver on hand, unless we sell that batch of goods to the Lin family. If that's the case, then we'll be letting nephew buy down." Baiyu smiled and waved his hand, saying, "It's fine. This business is very important." The 2 of them nodded. Faced with such a big business, they, who were in urgent need of money, naturally would not turn down such a huge profit for a promise. The opportunity could not be missed, and it would not come again. Next time, they would not encounter such a stupid foreign merchant. In a shop in front, a shop assistant scratched his head in confusion and mumbled, "Foreigners all talk like this." Chapter 695. The city of Feng Province was in a mess these days. Every day, officers and soldiers could be seen arresting people and passing through the streets. Not only the officials of Feng Province were in a panic, but also the common people were affected. There were fewer pedestrians on the streets than usual. Some officers and soldiers passed by just now. I wonder who was arrested this time. I heard that it was the district magistrate of the neighboring county. He embezzled a lot of money, and people's lives were involved. He deserved it. This is the end of corrupt officials. Who knows? The first prince brought people to Feng Province to make trouble. Obviously, he is targeting the 3rd prince. Maybe it was them, Shu. How do you say that? Aren't you afraid of losing your head? Second Miss Liu wanted to drink fish soup today. In order to pick out fresh fish, Li woke up early and went to the market. He carried a fish in his hand. When he walked on the street, he heard many similar words. The situation of the royal family of the Qi kingdom was different from that of the Jing kingdom. Few sons of the emperor of the Jing kingdom were successful. But the emperor of the Qi kingdom was different. He had several princes. Although they were not outstanding, they had their own talents. Among them, the 3rd prince of the Qi kingdom, Zhao Yi, was the best. At such a young age, he had done many great things that were praised by the officials and the emperor. In more than 10 years, he developed the barren Feng province into an important city of the country. He was surrounded by countless talents and enjoyed a high prestige among the people. He was also an outstanding figure of the younger generation, a real master of both literature and martial arts. Because of this, the 3rd prince, Zhao Yi, enjoyed a high prestige among the people of the Qi kingdom. Many officials in the court thought highly of him and thought that he was the best candidate to inherit the throne in the future. In some things, the Qi kingdom was different from the Jing kingdom and the surrounding countries. Nominally, the eldest son of the legal wife inherited the throne. But since the establishment of the Qi kingdom, there were not many princes who really inherited the throne. Because the eldest son of the legal wife was incompetent,
he was replaced by a more outstanding prince. Such things happened frequently in the history of the Qi Kingdom. Even the officials and citizens of the Qi Kingdom had formed a mindset of, if you can do it, you can do it. If you can't, there's someone else. Not to mention that he was only the eldest son of the legitimate wife for the time being. Even if he had already become the crown prince, they would not be able to relax until the last moment of the former emperor's life. The first prince of the Qi Kingdom must be feeling a lot of pressure, especially when he had a younger brother who was more outstanding than him in every aspect and was even more handsome than him. That was why he had worked so hard this time. In just a few days, the storm had spread from Fengzhou City to the surrounding counties, and even to further places. In any case, the surrounding prefectures could be considered as the third prince's sphere of influence. He would rather kill the wrong person than let him go. Over the past few days, he had learned quite a lot about the Qi Kingdom. To a certain extent, the first prince of the Qi Kingdom was also a pitiful person. If he had been born in the Jing Kingdom, he would not have needed to compete with so many people. The throne would have been easy and stable. As long as he was not like the king of Shu, who was determined to seek death from the capital city to Shuzhou, he would have inherited the throne without any suspense. It would have been better if he had stayed in the capital and enjoyed a comfortable life. He would not have been like what he was doing now, running all over the country with a group of imperial censors just to increase his chances of seizing power. If he was not careful, he might even offend a lot of people. Why bother? Li Yi sighed and picked up the fish to have a look. It was still alive. If it was dead, the soup would not be fresh. When he walked to the gate of Fenglin Garden, Lin Yong walked in from outside. When he saw him, he was startled and immediately walked up to him. He said, just in time, "Miss wants to see you. Come in with me." "What's the matter?" Li stopped and asked. Lin Yong pulled his arm and said, "The Ma family and the Su family are here. They seem to want to discuss something." "Oh, it's too late. Let's go there first." Li Yi handed the fish to him and said, "I'll go there myself. Help me put this fish into the tank. I'm going to make soup tonight. Don't kill it." Lin Yong nodded and said, "Okay. What time tonight?" "I'll go there after I finish my work in the shop." Wanru, we were indeed in the wrong in the previous matter. Shopkeeper Ma sat in his seat and turned to look at Lin Wanru. He said apologetically, "It's just that the market has changed recently. If we don't raise the price, we'll lose money. I hope you won't blame us." Shopkeeper Su hurriedly said, "That's right. We've been working together for so many years. When the Lin family was still in your grandfather's hands, they bought from us. It's not worthwhile to hurt our relationship because of such a small matter. Don't you think so?" Lin Wanru looked at the two of them and asked, "Why don't the two of you get straight to the point? Why are you here today?" "It's about the goods. We've thought it through." Shopkeeper Ma stood up and looked at her. He said, "How about we trade according to the price we discussed before?" Shopkeeper Su nodded and said, "Yes, yes. We'll trade according to the price we discussed at the beginning. After we went back, we thought about it. This matter was indeed our fault. We've been friends for so many years. Even if we lose a little money, we can't let you suffer a loss." Lin Wanru looked at the two of them. Her expression was calm, but there was a trace of surprise in her eyes. Before today, the Ma family and the Su family insisted on the price and were unwilling to budge. Why did they suddenly change their minds? They were so anxious to sell that batch of goods to the Lin family. Could it be that there was something wrong with that batch of goods? "The two of you can go back first. I'll think about this matter." Lin Wanru thought for a moment and looked at the two of them. Shopkeeper Ma and Shopkeeper Su's expressions changed slightly. What was there to think about? They were going to trade with those foreign merchants tomorrow. If they couldn't sell that batch of goods, they wouldn't be able to gather enough money. At that time, wouldn't that deal with a sure profit and no loss be ruined? Shopkeeper Ma said in a hurried tone, "Wanru, what else is there to think about? Let's go according to the original price. Miss Lin, why are you looking for me?" Li Yi stood at the door and looked at Lin Wanru. Shopkeeper Ma's words were interrupted. He looked at her with a dissatisfied expression. Lin Wanru stood up and said, "Come in first." In the past, she did things swiftly and decisively. She wouldn't be influenced by outsiders when she did business. However, She didn't know when she started to care more about the opinions of the people in front of her. Although the other party was just a scholar, he could always give her a lot of inspiration when he talked about business. Time would always prove that his ideas were right. Shopkeeper Ma looked at him and asked Lin Wanru tentatively, "Wanru, this is the Lin family's accountant." Li looked at him and said, "Please wait here for a moment." Lin Wanru said to the two of them first. After nodding slightly at Li Yi, she turned and walked into the inner room. Li Yi slowly followed her. "The Ma family and the Su family are going to cooperate with the Lin family again?" Li Yi asked. "They said that they are willing to trade for the raw materials at the price we discussed before." Lin Wanru nodded and said, "They didn't back down at all yesterday. Today they are so attentive. I don't know what they are planning." Li Yi looked at her and asked, "Haven't you bought a lot of things from the foreign merchants? Can you still eat those goods?" "It's a bit difficult." Lin Wanru shook her head and said, "But with those goods, the Lin family won't have to rely on these three families for a few years. It's an opportunity." Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "Then let's go." Seeing the two of them coming out, Shopkeeper Ma and Shopkeeper Su immediately went to greet them. Shopkeeper Su asked eagerly, "Wanru, have you thought about it?" Li Yi smiled and walked forward. He said, "The Lin family, the Ma family, and the Su family have been cooperating for so many years. Do you still need to think about this?" The two of them looked at the young man in front of them and were stunned. Since when did the affairs of the Lin family become decided by an accountant? However, seeing that Lin Wanru didn't move, Shopkeeper Ma seemed to have realized something. He smiled and said, "That's good. That's good. Then the price will be according to... The price is not a problem as long as it's cheap." Li waved his hand and said, "Sit down and talk." Chapter 696. Seeing that Lin Wanru's attitude seemed to have changed, Shopkeeper Ma and Shopkeeper Su sat down at ease and took a sip of tea. Shopkeeper Ma said unhurriedly, "Both our families have prepared the goods. May I know when the Lin family will pick them up?" "There's no rush." He picked up his teacup and took a sip. "Before that, there's one more thing I need to make clear to the two of you." Lin Wanru looked at him, then at the teacup in his hand. Her lips parted slightly, but in the end, she did not say anything. "Feel free to speak your mind," Manager Su said with a smile. He looked at the young man sitting in the main seat, then at Lin Wanru. He thought to himself, the Bai family has plotted against the Lin family for so long, but in the end, it was all for someone else's benefit. Fortunately, Bai did not come today. Otherwise, if he had seen this scene, he did not know how he would feel. Li looked at them and said, "A few days ago, you unilaterally raised the price," Shopkeeper Ma said anxiously. "That's all in the past." Li waved his hand and said, "Because of your price increase, the Lin family just bought a batch of jewelry yesterday. At this time, we do not have enough money to accept these two batches of goods." "Is that so?" Shopkeeper Ma and Shopkeeper Su's expressions changed. "Therefore, we can only accept goods from one family." Li looked at the two of them and said, "As for whether it is the Ma family or the Su family, you two can discuss it yourselves." Having said that, he took another sip of tea and turned to look at Lin Wanru. He smiled and said, "Today's tea is quite good. Did you change the tea leaves?" Lin Wanru's gaze lingered on his teacup. She said, "No, it might be because of the water. The water today was specially picked from the mountain spring by Big Brother Lin." Having said that, she glanced at Shopkeeper Ma and Shopkeeper Su, whose expressions had changed slightly, but did not say anything. The price of the jewelry bought from the foreign merchants was low. Although it was not a small amount, the Lin family did not have to worry about it. If they really wanted to accept the goods from the Ma and Su families, they would only be a little nervous. He glanced at Li Yi again, and he more or less understood the meaning of Li Yi's words. One family. Shopkeeper Ma's expression changed slightly. He did not expect that the Lin family had already found a new partner. If he could only accept goods from one family, then the goods from the other family would have to remain in his hands.
The reason why they had unscrupulously raised the price before was that this line of business had already been established in Fengzhou. The Lin family could only get their goods from these two stores. It was the same for them. Those big stores had their own channels. Without the Lin family, no one could buy their goods. It was not certain whether the goods could be sold in the future. If they could not get the silver today, they would not be able to complete the transaction with the foreign merchants tomorrow. They would have to watch a lot of silver slip away in front of their eyes. The loss would be immeasurable. Shopkeeper Ma stood up and sighed. The Ma family and the Su family have always advanced and retreated together. In that case, we have disturbed you today. Brother Su, let's go. Goodbye. Shopkeeper Su also stood up immediately. The two of them casually cupped their hands and turned to leave. Lin Wanru came over and looked out the door. She said, "They have left." Li Yi took another sip of tea and said, "They will be back soon." "Are you sure?" Lin Wanru raised her eyebrows. Li Yi smiled and said, "Wait and see." Although they called each other Brother Ma and Brother Su affectionately, it was just a fake brotherly relationship. When it came to the interests of each family, even blood brothers would turn against each other. The two families were currently short of money. Otherwise, they would not have come over to beg the Lin family to buy the goods. Now it was just a matter of who could not endure it first. The taste of the tea today is really different. It doesn't seem to be because of the water. Li Yi picked up the teacup and looked at her. Lin Wanru pointed to the teacup on the table and said, "This is red date and wolfberry tea. And this is my teacup." Li Yi was startled. He lifted the lid of the teacup and looked at it again. He slowly put down the teacup. The atmosphere in the room was a little awkward. Haha, red date and wolfberry tea is good. Red dates can nourish the body, nourish the blood, and calm the nerves. Wolfberry nourishes the liver and eyesight. Drinking more of this tea can also improve anemia caused by menstruation. Cough. In short, drinking more is good. Li Yi coughed twice and stood up from the chair. He cupped his hands towards the door and said, "Shopkeeper Ma, please come in." Seeing Shopkeeper Ma walk in again, a trace of surprise finally appeared on Lin Wanru's face. A smile appeared on Shopkeeper Ma's face, and he said, "Haha, Miss Lin, I thought about it. We can still talk about that batch of goods again." Lin Wanru looked at Li Yi. Li Yi took a step forward with a troubled expression on his face and said, "Shopkeeper Ma, to be honest, our Lin family does not lack jade materials this time. Instead, we're more interested in the Su family's gemstones. So, Shopkeeper Ma, I can only apologize." Shopkeeper Ma was startled. His expression suddenly changed, and he immediately said, "Miss Lin, think about it again. Recently, the market for jade has been very good. There is no harm in hoarding more goods." Li Yi shook his head and said, "I'm sorry, Shopkeeper Ma. We still think 90%. Shopkeeper Ma looked at them and said, "I'll lower the price to 90%. 90% of the market price is fine." This time, the amount of liuli was huge. He calculated the family's surplus money and scraped together some from here and there, but it was still far from enough. The value of this batch of goods was not small. It could be said that this batch of goods was his last hope. Li Yi frowned and shook his head. "This is really not a problem of money." Shopkeeper Ma clenched his teeth and said with a trembling voice, "Give me another 5%. Can you give me another 5%? Money is really not important." Shopkeeper Ma's eyes were already filled with tears. He clenched his teeth and said, 80%. 80%. I can't go any lower. Go outside and ask around. There is no such price anywhere." Lin Wanru looked at Shopkeeper Ma. She had been dealing with him for many years, but this was the first time she saw such an expression on his face. When she turned to look at Li Yi, the expression on her pretty face became somewhat complicated. What confidence did he have to be able to force Shopkeeper Ma to this state? "Humph, you said there's no such price anywhere." A cold snort came from outside the door. Shopkeeper Su strode in and said coldly, "My Su family is willing to give you another 5% on top of the 80%. Surname Su, what is the meaning of this? Surname Ma, what is the meaning of sneaking back here? Aren't you?" Li looked at Lin Wanru and shrugged slightly. He was very pleased with his prediction. Lin Wanru glanced at him and sat down on a chair to the side. She took a sip of tea and looked at the two quarreling men in the hall. She sighed. At this moment, she actually felt some sympathy for them. Suddenly, as if she had thought of something, she slowly turned her head and looked at the teacup in her hand. The expression on her pretty face froze, and she didn't even swallow the tea in her mouth. "You two calm down. Calm down." The atmosphere between the two people gradually became white-hot. When one of them was already looking at the chairs in the hall, Li Yi knew that he couldn't let them continue arguing like this. "We are all doing business together. We see each other all the time. Don't hurt the harmony between us." He walked in between the two people and separated them. He said, "Isn't it because of the problem of the goods? I have a way to get the goods of both families to sell." "What way?" The two people immediately looked at him. "How about we sell the goods of both families at 50% of the market price?" He looked at them and encouraged, "This way, the Lin family will be able to buy all the goods of both families." "Pooh!" Lin Wanru's body leaned forward slightly. She almost spat out the mouthful of tea that she didn't know whether she had swallowed it or spat it out. When she saw Li Yi looking at her, she awkwardly covered her face with her sleeves and secretly wiped away the water at the corner of her mouth. When she raised her head, the expression on her face froze. She had finally swallowed that mouthful of tea in a panic. At this time, Shopkeeper Ma and Shopkeeper Su finally recovered from the shock of that sentence. 50%? Why don't you just rob a bank?" Shopkeeper Ma was the first to jump up and down. Shopkeeper Su quickly said, "Do you know what you were saying? 50%? How are we going to make a profit? Our Lin family is also in this business." Li looked at the two of them and said, "Everyone knows how much profit there is in this business. You can still make a profit from 50%. As humans, don't be too greedy. That's for you." Shopkeeper Ma looked at him and said angrily, "Brother Su, let's go." Shopkeeper Su's expression changed. He clenched his fists in his sleeves and finally relaxed them. He closed his eyes and said slowly, "Brother Ma, you go back first. I want to have a good talk with this greedy young man." Chapter 697. You. Shopkeeper Ma stood rooted to the ground and looked at Shopkeeper Su in astonishment. "You'll do it even if it's 50%? Shopkeeper Su stared into his eyes, as if he could see through his thoughts. "Are you not going to do it?" Shopkeeper Ma's expression became a little unnatural after being seen through. He said in a low voice, 50%? I won't be earning much. It doesn't matter. Even if we can't do business, we can still be friends." Seeing Lin Yong looking around outside, he waved at him and said, "Brother Lin, come and send Shopkeeper Ma off." Shopkeeper Ma clenched his fists and loosened them. A dry smile quickly appeared on his face as he said, don't worry. Everything can be discussed. Without the Lin family, this batch of goods could not be disposed of in a short period of time. The business with the four merchants would also be ruined. That young man was right. If they sold the goods at half price, they would not suffer a loss. However, the profit would be pitifully small. Of course, if they rejected the Lin family, they would eventually make a move. However, they could not afford to wait any longer. The profit from this batch of goods was a small matter. Lily was a big deal. They could not lose the big picture for small. They had learned this principle decades ago. At this moment, while the two of them were feeling gloomy, they could not help but feel resentment towards the Bai family. If not for Bai's persuasion, they would not have suddenly made things difficult for the Lin family, and they would not be in this situation today. Shopkeeper Ma turned to look at Lin Wanru. There was a hint of pleading in his voice. "Wanru, 50% is too little. We've worked for nothing these days. Why don't we add another 10%? Lin Wanru raised her head to look at Li Yi. She stood up from her chair, but did not reply. Shopkeeper Ma closed his eyes and said anxiously, 5%. Even 5% is fine." After the two shopkeepers left, Lin Wanru's strange gaze made Li Yi feel a little guilty. He looked away and said, "You don't know, but I'm actually very good at bargaining.
Lin Wanru finally opened her mouth and asked, "Why did they still agree when we lowered the price to such a low level?" Li shook his head and said, "How would I know? Maybe they found their conscience and felt guilty to the Lin family, so they wanted to make up for it and seek peace of mind. I heard that some people have some special hobbies. The more they lose in business, the more peace of mind they feel." The way Lin Wanru looked at him now was completely different from before. The final transaction price with the Ma family and the Su family was 55% of the market price, which was already an incredibly low price, exactly half of the price they offered 2 days ago. This was simply unimaginable in the past. It could even be said that the Lin family got a bargain for nothing. Lin Wanru looked at Li Yi again. It seemed that since he came here, the opportunities for the Lin family to get a bargain for nothing had increased. Seeing that her eyes had been circling around him, Li Yi felt uncomfortable all over. He stood up and said, "If there's nothing else, I'll leave first. There's still a fish to deal with at home." Lin Wanru finally withdrew her gaze, stood up, and said, "Thank you for today's matter. It's just helping to haggle. It's a small matter. I'm leaving." Li Yi waved his hand and walked out of the door. Watching him walk out, Lin Wanru sat down again and stared blankly at the teacup on the table. She had been in charge of the Lin family for a few years and encountered many things in business. She had also accumulated some experience and means, but all the means were generally in line with the norm. Today, her horizons had been truly broadened. She had seen very clearly that when shopkeeper Ma and shopkeeper Su had left, their eyes were glistening with tears. Every time this happened, she would start to wonder who the people she had picked up back then were. Shopkeeper Ma and shopkeeper Su's decisiveness had actually slightly exceeded Li Yi's expectations. He had thought that it would be good enough if they could lower the price to 70%, but it seemed that he had underestimated the importance they placed on the deal tomorrow. A large batch of azure glass was going to be shipped to the Qi Kingdom. This time, they were destined to suffer a loss. He felt a little guilty for setting them up twice in a row. When he walked out of Fragrant Forest Park, he was surprised to find that the two men had not left yet. The young man, named by you, was also at the entrance of Fragrant Forest Park. He must have bumped into the two men when he was about to enter. Shopkeeper Ma, shopkeeper Su. Baiyu was about to greet the two men, but they merely glanced at him coldly and walked straight past him. If not for Baiyu, they would not have suffered such a huge loss this time. They had accumulated a bellyful of anger earlier, so naturally, they would not be in a good mood when they saw him again. Baiyu looked at them suspiciously. "The two of you, you're going to look for Miss Lin again?" Shopkeeper Ma glanced at Baiyu and sneered. "Nephew Bai, I'm afraid you're going to waste your efforts this time. You've been so attentive so many times, but in the end, haven't you ended up benefiting a pretty boy?" Shopkeeper Su shook his head. "Brother Ma, how can you say that? Nephew Bai doesn't know about this yet. Don't stab him in the chest again." Baiyu's expression changed. "What do you mean? What do you mean by Chi pretty boy?" This time, the two men merely glanced at him mockingly before turning to leave, leaving Baiyu standing where he was. His expression began to fluctuate. Li walked past him. He glanced at the two men's backs and curled his lips. What kind of people were they? Miss Lin had kindly accepted their goods so that they would not miss out on tomorrow's big business. Not only were they not grateful, they even dared to spread rumors about her. Were they even human? He had seen all of this. Lin Wanru had always been clean and virtuous. The man who had appeared by her side was the married man, Lin Yong, who was in charge of her safety. Where did this pretty boy come from? Pretty boy. When he reached the entrance of his courtyard, Li's footsteps paused. He turned around and looked in the direction that the two men had left. The trace of guilt in his heart instantly disappeared without a trace. "It was a pleasure working with you. It was a pleasure working with you." Shopkeeper Ma nodded to the foreign merchant and opened a large box placed in the center of the shop. After carefully inspecting the items inside, he waved his hand at the shop assistant behind him. The assistant immediately handed the box over to Shopkeeper Ma. The foreign merchant took the box and opened the lid. He saw that it was filled with neatly stacked gold nuggets. Shopkeeper Ma said, "These were exchanged from the bank this morning. Please check them." The foreign merchant placed the box to one side and bit each gold nugget. He waved his hand and said, "There's no need to check. We believe in the Ma family's reputation." Shopkeeper Ma looked at the foreign merchant and said, "I don't know if you have time. I'm holding a banquet at Agarwood Tower today." The foreign merchant waved his hand and said, "The Bai family and the Su family are still there. They're waiting for us." Shopkeeper Ma smiled and said, "In that case, I won't keep you." He casually pointed an assistant and said, "Go and see these important guests off." When a few of them walked out of the shop, he opened the box again and saw a pile of sparkling and translucent glass inside. His face was filled with ecstasy. "We're rich, we're rich." Outside the shop, a shop assistant saw the foreign merchants out and said, "Gentlemen, I'll see you off here. Goodbye." You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.